Chapter 842, The God King is on the brink of death. At that critical moment, Ethan caught sight of someone who looked almost exactly like him. Yet the resemblance was misleading. This was the legendary swordsman Karak, and his rise to power had nothing to do with ordinary racial gifts. Karak was born on Strontia a few centuries ago. Rumor held that he hailed from a noble bloodline, but no trace of his family ever surfaced. Orphaned early, he was taken in and raised by the planet's Elder Council. As part of their long-term strategy, the Elders selected Karak and 9 other promising youths for a specialized training program, the recruitment testing for the Shi'ar Imperial Guard. Under the Shi'ar Empire's rule, each vassal world must send its finest warriors to serve in the Guard. To prepare, Karak and his companions underwent rigorous genetic enhancements overseen by Strontia's top scientists. Though his unique physiology was expertly modified, the true foundation of Karak's power lay in psionic mastery. His swordsmanship, fueled by powerful mental projections, made him a fearsome gladiator. In fact, the title gladiator that Karak now bears is the very same honorific once held by the accuser who prosecuted Ronan the Accuser. And as Ethan watched him advance, blade in hand, he knew the God King's final hour had truly come. For 5 centuries, Dujian had held the post of commander of the Imperial Guard, faithfully serving one Shi'ar emperor after another. Tonight, he stood among 2 new swordmasters, Karak, known as Broomhead for his shock of crimson hair, and the newcomer dubbed Kelphead, whose jet-black fringe earned him his peculiar nickname. Kelphead fixed his narrow gaze on Karak. "I never imagined you actually belonged to my tribe." Karak's eyes flicked up. "Are you claiming I'm a clone of the Galactic Empire?" Kelphead pointed at Karak's face. Identical bone structure, the same scar tracing his brow, save for the hairstyle. Even through enhanced vision, every cell matched his own. He leaned forward, voice quiet but insistent. "Your cells are my cells. You're one of my clones." A faint smile curved Karak's lips. "You've got it wrong. My name is Kal-El." He shook his head, as if dismissing a stubborn rumor. Dujian watched, suspicion creasing his brow. Kelphead possessed every memory of their shared past. How could he be an imposter? And Galvatron had already arranged all of Kelphead's identities. Not even an investigation led by Haitai could stray beyond those established records. "You've been deceived," Kelphead pressed, stepping closer. "You're not Kal-El, and you're not of my clan." Dujian's opal eyes narrowed. He turned to Haitai and spoke with quiet conviction. "He truly is a clone." Haitai hesitated, leaving the question suspended in the hush of the night. Ethan stared in disbelief as the Galaxy Empire's technology replicated him in an instant. A perfect copy, down to the way he gripped his sword, emerged on the deck beside him. It was a twist on swordsmanship he'd never imagined possible. The Shi'ar Empire had long sought this kind of battlefield cloning. It wasn't for lack of will, but for lack of means. Even if Ethan had lent them his expertise, they would have failed. He had always believed himself unique, a singular master of the blade. Now, confronted with his double, he knew how gravely mistaken he'd been, and how terrifying the Galaxy Empire truly was. One clone of Ethan could lay waste to the finest Shi'ar squadrons. No amount of strategy or countermeasure would fully blunt that edge. Above him, Admiral Krell watched with steely composure. The giant viewport behind the Admiral framed the distant curve of 100 battlecruisers, the ominous armada of the Galaxy Empire poised to strike. Krell's voice echoed in the command chamber. "Surrender, Karak. You are destined to stand with us. The Galaxy Empire opens its arms to every people and every race. There is no merit in staying chained to the Shi'ar. Their dominion will soon crumble beneath our might." Ethan met Krell's gaze steadily. He clenched his fists, feeling the hum of his sword at his side. "I will never surrender," he replied. Krell inclined his head once, as though granting permission to an opponent worthy of respect. Then he turned and motioned to the officers behind him, a silent signal that the discussion was over. And in that pregnant pause before battle, both men prepared for the clash to come. Chapter 10. The Fall of Asgard. Ethan sighed as he watched his people stubbornly resist change. No matter how many reforms he proposed, they clung to old traditions. In frustration, his trusted lieutenant, known only as Kelphead, finally abandoned the cause and struck out on his own. Undeterred, Ethan turned his full attention to the Dujian, the legendary fighting sword technique he had recently acquired. Drawing on every scrap of data in the Imperial archives, he reverse-engineered its secrets and, in doing so, gave birth to an entirely new warrior race under the banner of the Galactic Empire. Meanwhile, in the golden halls of Asgard, a far graver drama was unfolding. The great god King Odin, ruler of the 9 realms, lay on a bed of shimmering runes. His once towering frame was gaunt, his breath shallow, wounded fatally in a battle whose details he could not yet share. Word of his condition was sent on the winds, reaching the one man who might save him. On the desolate ice plains of Jotunheim, Thor, the god of thunder, roared with frustration as streaks of frost danced around his electrified hammer, Mjolnir. Since he had tamed the legendary goat of destruction, he spent more time soaring the heavens than standing guard over his father's realm. Lately, his favorite destination was Earth, where whispers of a Saiyan invasion kept him on his toes. The Saiyans, bold, fierce, and skilled, had been Thor's most exhilarating opponents. He'd reveled in every blow that sent him to his knees, until the day Vegeta and his comrades broke him utterly. That defeat unlocked something deep within him. The dormant power of the Thunder God surged outward, and Thor learned at last to command it fully. Each day since, he'd grown stronger. A sudden surge of cosmic energy signaled his summons. Lightning crackled across the sky as he summoned Mjolnir and teleported back to his father's hall. He skidded to a halt beside the throne room, wiping frost from his brow. "Father!" Thor's voice echoed off the stone pillars. Odin's pale eyes fluttered open. The All-Father's voice was little more than a whisper. "Thor, I am dying." In that moment, even the god of thunder felt the weight of fate descend upon him, and the promise of terrible choices yet to come. Lightning crackled beyond the grand windows of the throne room, flickering across Odin's stern face. Thor's grip tightened on the newly forged thunder axe, his weapon fused from Mjolnir and the storm itself, yet his voice shook with disbelief. "Impossible, father," he said. "I'm as strong as any god. How could there be?" Odin raised a hand, stilling him. "There's something you've never been told," he began quietly. "You have a sister." Thor's eyes went wide. "A sister? That's absurd. I've never heard you, or mother, mention her in all my life." "There was a reason we kept her hidden," Odin replied, his voice heavy with regret. "In the early days of our conquests, Asgard needed an iron-willed ruler, someone as ruthless as necessary." He paused, as if gathering memories. "Your sister is Hela. She once led our armies across the 9 realms, served as Asgard's executioner, and for a time even wielded Mjolnir in battle." Thor glanced down at the thunder axe in his hand, recalling the power he felt at its haft. "What became of her?" Odin's gaze darkened. "When I vowed to rule with justice and mercy, Hela's ambition blazed out of control. She challenged my rule, swore to kill me and seize the throne. In the end, I had no choice but to banish her." Silence fell between father and son as the thunder rolled beyond the walls. Thor stared at the weapon in his hand, the weight of his father's revelation settling on his shoulders. Like a gathering storm, Thor stared at his father in disbelief. All those years he had believed Hela lost to their might, vanquished by the Valkyrie Legion Odin himself had sent against her, yet here stood the proof of another truth, darker and more terrible. "You said she was destroyed," Thor whispered, voice trembling. "What do you mean sealed in Midgard?" Odin's eyes, heavy with sorrow, met his son's. "After we stripped Hela of her divine power, we bound her to Midgard, but I cannot maintain that seal forever. My end is near, and once I fall, the bond will shatter. When that happens, she will come roaring back to Asgard, and none but you can stand against her. Your strength has surpassed even mine, Thor. You are the last line of defense." Thor staggered back, pain and denial warring in his heart. "No," he growled, clenching his fists until his knuckles whitened. "I won't let you die, and I won't let Hela loose on our people. I'll find a way to save you both. Perhaps Tony Stark, has some means to keep you alive." But even as he spoke, doubt gnawed at him. Could technology trump the fate of gods? Odin reached out, his grip suddenly tighter than Thor had ever felt it. The old king's strength surged through his arm, and Thor sensed a power far greater than any he had wielded himself. "Focus only on Hela," Odin said, his voice both command and plea. "Nothing else matters. Protect Asgard." And in that instant, Thor knew his destiny. To stand alone against his own sister's wrath, or watch the realm he loved be torn apart. Chapter 843, Ethan's Trial. We must never allow Hela to return to Asgard. Those were Odin's final words before he died, a command heavy as any warhammer. The goddess of death had been locked away for 1,000 years, but if she ever broke free, all of Asgard would be plunged into everlasting darkness. Worse still, her power was bound to her homeland. Should she rise there, no force in the 9 realms could stand against her. The responsibility weighed fiercely on Odin's heir. Unknown to most, Odin believed his son's strength had grown through customary training alone. He never suspected the true source of Ethan's newfound might, the relentless assaults of a certain destroyer sheep. Each dawn, when the sun's first rays pierced the clouds over Valhalla, Ethan would be flung backward by an unpredictable, otherworldly force. Sometimes the creature even stamped him flat in mock battle. Day after day, he endured bruises, bone-deep aches, and the humiliation of defeat. Yet each knockdown forged him stronger, faster, more resilient. "Father," Ethan howled, his voice echoing through the silent throne room. He knelt before Odin's fallen form, tears blurring his vision. In that moment, all the pain and hardship of his secret training vanished, leaving only desperation and grief. He reached out to the lifeless hand of the All-Father, vowing with every shred of his being that Hela would never threaten Asgard again. Odin stared at his son, a mixture of relief and sorrow in his ancient eyes. He reached out and gently patted Thor's broad shoulder. His voice, worn by countless trials yet still warm, bore both comfort and urgency. "My son, I can hold on only a little longer. You must be strong. Asgard needs you." Thor felt the weight in his father's words, the promise of support, the inevitability of parting. He nodded, determination hardening his features. "I will not fail you." Then, without another word, he turned and strode from the hall. Odin watched him go, his eyelids drifting closed in peaceful resignation. As his breathing slowed, Odin's form began to unravel. He shimmered, then split into a myriad of golden sparks that drifted upward, scattering like stardust across Asgard's skies and fields. "Queen Mother," Thor whispered to himself, urgency propelling him down the marble corridor. He found Frigga waiting on the palace terrace, her elegant silhouette framed by the pale light of dawn. Though her expression was grave, and her eyes glistened with unshed tears, there was steel beneath her sorrow, steadfast resolve that mirrored Thor's own. At the sound of his approach, she turned to him, ready to stand by his side as the dawn of a new reign broke over their realm. Ethan burst into the solar and stood before his mother, Frigga, barely containing his urgency. "Mother, I went to Father's chamber. He said he's dying, but there's still some time." Before he could finish, Frigga's face drained of color. Her breath caught in her throat, and she closed her eyes, gathering herself against a sudden wave of grief. "Odin," she whispered, voice trembling. When she opened her eyes again, they shone with dreadful certainty. Ethan hesitated, but the fear in his chest drove him to speak up. "What happened, Mother?" He sounded so certain. Frigga didn't answer. Instead, she sprang to her feet and hurried from the hall. Alarmed, Ethan followed, his footsteps echoing through the empty corridors. He called after her, but Frigga moved with purpose, as though guided by some unseen force. They rushed into Odin's private chambers, and found them deserted. The raised dais stood bare, the great throne lay unoccupied. A hush hung in the air so heavy it pressed upon Ethan's chest. He looked to his mother, voice trembling. "Where is he?" Frigga stood at the center of the room, face lifted toward the distant vaulted ceiling, as if searching for a sign. At last she spoke, her voice steady but low. "Odin has departed from us," she said, "yet his spirit remains woven into every breath Asgard draws. We must honor his passing by carrying forward his legacy, by ruling wisely for the sake of our people, and by fulfilling his final wish." Ethan closed his eyes, letting the weight of her words settle in his heart. In that silent chamber, he understood at last the path laid before him, to lead with courage and compassion, guiding Asgard into a new age, just as his father would have wanted. Ethan no longer saw himself as merely a warrior, but as the leader who now carried Asgard's fate and hope on his shoulders. There was no time for sorrow. His father was gone, and Hela had almost certainly shattered her seal. He had to reach Earth at once. Before departing, Ethan found Heimdall standing vigil at the bridge's entrance. "Under no circumstances are you to open the Bifrost," he ordered. Heimdall bowed his head. Of course, my king. Ethan hesitated, unsettled by the weight of that title. I haven't formally taken the crown yet. We'll settle that when I return. Steeling himself, he raised his axe, called down the rainbow bridge, and stepped through its shimmering arch into Midgard. Back on Asgard, Odin's words echoed in his mind. Everything he needed to know about Hela's prison, the location of her seal, and the deadly power she wielded. He could already sense that cold, erosive force. If he didn't push himself to the very limit, Hela's death power would overwhelm him. Half a world away, the Earth's secret watchers detected the sudden arrival. A voice crackled over their comms. That's the Bifrost opening. He's here. Ethan's jaw clenched. There was no turning back now. Chapter text: Unexpected Arrival. Why didn't that boy come to Earth without so much as a word? Tony Stark muttered, glancing at the readout from his upgraded Jarvis. The sensor data flickered relentlessly. Some powerful being, and Stark didn't recognize the signature. He tapped commands on his wrist console and sealed the cabin. In seconds, he was locked into his latest Iron Man armor, the bleeding-edge Mark LX-14. But he didn't stop there. He initiated a covert subroutine, Project Sentinel, running behind the scenes. It wasn't that he doubted Thor's honor. It was just that Thor had shown up unannounced before. Stark preferred to be overprepared. Elsewhere, high above the swirling clouds, Thor Odinson stood proud on the back of his summons, an ancient, rune-bound construct nicknamed the Destroyer Steed. He raised his hammer in salute and commanded, "Destroyer Steed, onward!" With a thunderous roar, the colossal mechanical beast leapt into the sky, cutting through mist and storm like a bolt of lightning. Each beat of its iron wings shook the heavens, pushing it past the limits of any known aircraft. In moments, it pierced the atmosphere and accelerated toward the swirling vortex, toward the destiny called down from the stars. Below, Tony's HUD tracked the movement in real time. He frowned. So that's Thor's approach vector, he said, cross-referencing the data. Project Sentinel, calibrate defensive grid around the arrival point. And Jarvis, keep a close eye on that boy's energy signature. We can't afford any surprises. As the Destroyer Steed vanished into the stratosphere, the tension inside Stark's workshop crackled with anticipation. Somewhere above, two legendary forces, one Asgardian god, one enigmatic newcomer, were racing toward Earth's fate. And Tony Stark, as always, would be waiting. Ethan's heart thundered as Hela, Asgard's exiled goddess of death, shattered the 1,000-year seal that had bound her. A suffocating pressure and simmering flames of vengeance radiated from her as she stepped from the swirling vortex. She wore a dark green, form-fitting combat suit etched with black runes of oblivion, and her eyelids were rimmed with intentional night-black shadow. No mark of fatigue, but a deliberate stroke of icy mystery. With each measured step, the air around her seemed to congeal under the weight of her power. Ethan watched her torch-bright eyes lock onto Thor, blazing with memories of old grievances and a chilling contempt for the world he now defended. Then her low, magnetic voice cut through the frozen silence. "Where is Odin?" Every syllable was driven from clenched teeth flashing like a blade against Thor's defenses. Thor drew in a slow, steadying breath, striving to calm the storm in his chest. Beside him, Ethan squared his shoulders, bracing himself for the reckoning that was about to unfold. Ethan's shoulders slumped as he spoke, his voice thick with helplessness. "Sister, father is gone." His eyes, glistening with unshed tears, betrayed a fierce longing for the man they both had lost, and a deep, gnawing sorrow over Hela's fate. All these years, he had clung to the secret hope that she would awaken from her enchanted slumber. Now, standing before her silent, motionless form, he felt that hope slipping away into the empty corridors of the ancient tomb. Hela's lips curled into a contemptuous smile, part regret for Odin's death, part bitterness that she couldn't take her vengeance herself. "What a pity," she murmured, the words dripping with sarcasm. "And you are?" Thor squared his shoulders, drawing in a steady breath. His heart hammered, but he knew he now embodied Asgard's light and justice. "I am Thor," he replied, voice firm, fists clenched at his sides to keep from lunging at her then and there. A cruel laugh escaped Hela as she tilted her head. "Thor," she echoed, distaste clear in her tone. "I still can't believe father sired such a dull-witted son." She swept a hand through her dark hair, the jagged horns of her helm gleaming in the crackling lightning overhead. Her eyes locked onto him, cold and unyielding, as if she could see every hidden doubt in his heart and strike at it. Or do you mean you simply refuse to accept that you've been demoted from heir apparent to second in line? A thunderclap split the sky as storm clouds roiled overhead, mirroring the explosive tension between Thor and Hela. Standing at the crossroads of Asgard's fate, Thor felt a whirlwind of emotions: anger, disappointment, bewilderment, and an undercurrent of sorrow he could not fully name. His fists clenched so fiercely that his knuckles went white, raw power humming through his arms and even making the air quiver around him. "I've never heard a crown prince demand the right of succession," he thundered, his voice cracking like the heavens themselves. It was more than a rebuke of Hela's ambition, it was his protest at being so utterly misunderstood. To Thor, the throne had never been a prize to covet but a burden to bear. He knew all too well that wearing the crown meant relinquishing personal freedom and forsaking dreams, shouldering the weight of protecting all of Asgard. But Hela, this sister he'd never known existed, placed power and rank above all else. That realization stung Ethan with disappointment. When she heard his words, she didn't flinch. Instead, her lips curved into a mad, power-hungry grin. "Everybody has a nice thing to say about me," she mocked, her voice cold. "You accuse me of craving the throne, but what about you? Don't pretend you have no stake in it." Her words slashed at Ethan like a dagger. She was probing for the secret longings buried in his heart, daring him to admit ambitions he barely recognized in himself. Ethan met her challenge with a steady eye and a dismissive roll of his gaze. "I'm sorry, but I really don't care about the throne," he said slowly, every syllable calm and measured. "There's no freedom in ruling." His answer was simple and absolute. He knew himself too well to be a king. What he hungered for was unbounded exploration, the clash of battle, the liberty to swing his hammer at whim, though Mjolnir was gone now. Hela's lips curved into a sardonic smile. "Freedom? That's just a convenient excuse for the weak. True strength means standing at the very summit, looking down on all others, and using an iron will and keen mind to forge your own order. What you call freedom is nothing more than a coward's way of dodging responsibility." Thor shook his head, a flicker of helplessness in his eyes. "I think we just see strength differently. To me, real power lies in facing your flaws, accepting responsibility, and working for the greater good. Yes, a throne sits high, but it's a lonely, crushing weight. It demands not just force, but wisdom, compassion, and sacrifice." Silence stretched between them. Then Hela's voice rang out, regal and unwavering. "Sacrifice? You're wrong, Thor. In this jungle of a world, sacrifice is the fate forced upon the weak. As for me, I will never be bound by anyone or anything, not even by a throne." Ethan's jaw tightened as Hela's words echoed in the silent hall. "What I want," she hissed, "is absolute control, power unmatched by anyone, and existence above all else." He shook his head, determination blazing in his eyes. "No, Hela, you misunderstand what freedom means. It isn't about running away, it's about choosing what burdens you will bear. I would rather protect Asgard than rule it. Everyone deserves the chance to find their own path. I'm not here to claim a throne, I'm here to stand guard." For a long moment, they stood motionless, their breath the only sound between them. Hela's eyes flickered with something like doubt, then hardened into icy rage. "Fool," she spat. "Do you really think running off can bring peace? In this world, only the strong are respected. Only by rising to the very top can you safeguard everything you love." Ethan took a slow, steadying breath, forcing calm into his voice. "Strength alone won't solve our problems. True power comes from inner resolve and compassion, from laying down your pride for a higher purpose. I may not be the strongest, but I'm willing to make that sacrifice. For Asgard, for its people, and for the future we both claim to want." "Sigurd, defend our family and friends," Thor's voice rang out, steel in his tone as he shifted into battle stance. Hela's lips curled into a cold sneer. "Family? Friends," she taunted. "They're only burdens to you. In a world where the strong prey upon the weak, only the powerful deserve to survive, and the rest are meant to be crushed." With that, she swept her arm through the air. From her fingertips sprang dozens of obsidian blades, night sky swords, that hurtled toward Thor like a meteor storm. Each blade pulsed with such force it threatened to rip the very fabric of space. Thor blurred to the side, his godly reflexes slicing him clear of most of the onslaught. Still, a few swords whispered past his cloak, slashing shallow tears into the fabric, a stark reminder that Hela's power was no idle threat. He planted his feet and squared his shoulders, sweat beading on his brow, even as adrenaline surged through him. He understood all too well that a head-on clash was unavoidable, but raw strength alone would not win against a sister consumed by bitterness and ambition. As another barrage of black blades shrieked toward him, Thor shouted across the chaos, "Hela! There's no honor in tearing Asgard apart. We need unity, not civil war." Make no mistake, our true enemies aren't just each other. Shadowy forces covet the fragile peace of the Nine Realms. The Dark Elves may have slipped through our grasp, but they're far from neutralized, and we mustn't forget the looming threat posed by the Saiyans. Chapter 845, The Cruel Brother Who Struck His Sister. Ethan had no desire to face off against his sister, Hela. She let out a cold laugh, her voice sharper than any blade. "You're hopelessly naive, Ethan. In the quest for power, there's no place for family loyalty or friendship, only the strong and the weak, and I'll be the one standing at the summit." A surge of anger flared in Ethan's chest. He fixed Hela with a steady gaze and spoke each word deliberately. "You're not worthy of being Odin's child. You know nothing of duty or sacrifice. You call this a struggle for the throne, but it's just a cover for your selfish hunger. A truly great leader never seizes power by trampling on those he loves." For a moment, Hela's furious tirade faltered, her expression flickering with something like doubt. Then she snapped back, her madness returning tenfold. "Enough of your moralizing. Asgard's future belongs to me, and anyone who stands in my way will be destroyed." Ethan closed his eyes briefly, steeling himself. He knew there was no reasoning with Hela. Her heart was frozen by ambition, and no plea for compassion could break through. Yet he refused to strike the first blow. Even if it meant clashing with his own sister, he would not abandon his principles or the people he swore to protect. With a deafening crack, the legendary Sword of the Night Sky, once dreaded by countless foes, shattered under Thor's thunderous strike, its fragments scattering like shooting stars across the void. Hela's eyes widened at the sight, her cold voice cutting through the storm with chilling authority. "Not bad, Thor," she said, each word laced with ice. "But such power is wasted on rebellion. Kneel before me, swear fealty, and I may yet spare your life, make you my vanguard, my executioner." Thunder rumbled in answer. Thor planted his feet, gripping his dwarven-forged battle axe as lightning danced along its blade. He did not flinch. "You're mistaken, Hela," he thundered. "I will never bow to you, nor become a tool in your hands." With that, he lifted his axe high, summoning a blaze of electric light, and roared his defiance against the goddess of death. As Ethan's words echoed through the air, the dormant power of the thunder god within him awoke in an explosive surge. Thick, roiling clouds swallowed the sky as thunder rumbled and lightning tore through the heavens, each flash crackling with enough force to shatter mountains and carve new rivers. Boom! The roar of thunder seemed like the voice of the gods themselves, and every jagged bolt of lightning was bone-shaking in its intensity. "Humph, stubborn." Hela's lips curled into a sneer, her features illuminated by streaks of phosphorescent light. She knew better than to underestimate her brother's might, but as the goddess of death, she was every bit as confident in her own power. Still, Ethan's unrelenting assault forced her to give ground, weaving and retreating to dodge thunderbolts that threatened to rend her very soul. For the first time, a flicker of unease crossed her face. She had clearly miscalculated Ethan's strength and determination. As each of her attacks was met and repelled by his, her anger swelled to a blistering peak. Despite the seal she'd just shattered and the toll it had taken on her strength, Hela swept her arm through the air. The earth trembled and cracked, spewing forth obsidian blades taller than mountains. Each jagged pillar, imbued with a deathly aura, thrust skyward, drawn to Thor's lightning as if to drain his power into the soil. But Thor, god of thunder, wielded the storm with flawless mastery. Even amid the whirlwind of his own bolts, he guided every strike with unerring precision. A few errant currents still flared off course, splitting against Hela's dark spears and fading into mist, but not enough to halt her assault. Seizing the chance, Hela clenched her fist overhead. A nameless energy crackled into being at her fingertips, and the ground answered once more. Dozens of black blades rained down like deadly hail, turning the battlefield into a forest of steel. Thor bellowed in defiance. His war axe crackled with thunder as he swung it in wide, roaring arcs. With each blow, a black pillar shattered, scattering shards of shadow across the earth, and still the storm god pressed forward, refusing to yield. Ethan roared in fury, surging forward as he weaved through the towering black nets like a bolt of lightning. With a powerful swing of his battle axe, he unleashed a tempest of thunder and lightning that coiled through the air like a colossal dragon, shattering each obsidian blade that sought to bind him. Under the strobing glow of crackling storms, he cut a solitary, majestic figure, every breath accompanied by the tremor of charged air, the raw thunder power within him straining to break free. "Charge!" he bellowed, not only to steel his own resolve, but to issue a challenge to the formidable foe before him, Hela. His muscles, taut as forged steel, rippled beneath his skin, veins alive with electric energy. He embodied pure, walking lightning, an unstoppable force destined to rend darkness itself. Across the battlefield, Hela watched him with a mixture of contempt and curiosity. Her midnight robes whispered in the gale, and all around her rose colossal pillars of death energy, black blades more than tall enough to crush any ordinary warrior into ash. Yet none of that deterred Ethan. With thunder in his veins and battle in his heart, he charged into the heart of darkness itself. Confronted by Thor's unleashed thunder, Hela let her true power surge forward. "Brother, your strength truly exceeds my expectations," she said, her voice low and magnetic, a chill threading through every word. "But do you really think that's enough to stop me? You're mistaken. Asgard will be mine, and the 9 realms will tremble beneath my feet." Thor answered only by swinging his axe harder. Each blow crackled with world-ending force, shattering the black pillars Hela had raised. The air filled with the acrid scent of scorched earth and the sweet tang of electricity, the price paid for this titanic clash. Then in a flash, Thor became pure lightning, streaking toward Hela with a single, decisive strike. She barely had time to lift her twin swords in defense, but even her greatest effort could only repel a fraction of the storm's fury. A deafening shockwave ripped through the air, sending Hela crashing backward and shattering her carefully erected defenses. Black gravel exploded outward in a storm of dust and debris, but when the haze cleared, she rose again. No longer the composed adversary she'd been moments before. A thin line of blood trickled from the corner of her mouth, and her once majestic horns lay broken at her feet. Within an instant, though, the splintered bone fused back together, proof of her unending vitality. Still, the quick repair did nothing to soften the grim resolve burning in her eyes. Opposite her stood Thor, feet planted firm on the ruined battleground. He raised his battle axe, its edge crackling with raw electricity, and the thunderous power coursing through his veins reached a fever pitch. Neither immortal nor god would yield now, not when the fate of all realms hung in the balance. Chapter 846, The Asgardian Family Drama, A Grand Spectacle. A pulsing beat rose in the distance, growing ever clearer, as if the very air molecules were dancing to its rhythm. Then, cutting through the clouds on some mysterious frequency, a familiar, mischievous voice rang out, slamming into Thor and Hela's eardrums. Hela bristled. She loathed that tiresome jingle. "Hey, Asgard's throwing a party on Earth and you didn't invite me? Well, look who's here. Stark, just in time." Thor's steadfast expression flickered with unease. For a moment, his eyes seemed to search the heavens themselves, trying to pinpoint the broadcast's source. In a blur of motion, Hela, the goddess of death, raised her blade and sliced through the night sky, aiming straight at the unseen speaker. The sword's edge gleamed with an unbearably cold light. Despite the sudden attack, Tony Stark didn't so much as flinch. He simply quipped back, voice dripping with challenge. "Impressed, or should I say terrified?" Ethan's voice crackled through the suit's comm system, clear and composed, as if he'd mapped every danger before it even appeared. Years of combat had taught him to stay calm under fire. Every close call only honed his caution sharper. Today, he was the living embodiment of his own reputation as Careless Stark. He twisted in midair, reprogramming his flight vector in a heartbeat. Hela's ebony blade whizzed past his shoulder, leaving nothing but a faint black vapor trail. Perched on a jagged outcrop, Hela allowed a subtle, approving smile to flicker across her lips. She didn't press her advantage just yet. She preferred to watch and wait. "Thor, old friend, you really know how to crash the party," Ethan quipped, his tone laced with wry amusement. The MK-99 armor shone in the dying light, its metallic plates reflecting the sunset. Forged by Ethan and Dr. Bruce Banner, the suit was more than just cutting-edge technology. It was a seamless marriage of biotech and nanotech. Infused with the Extremis virus, it didn't just amplify his strength. It became a living extension of his will, born from the desperate serum and Ethan's relentless tinkering. Banner had revealed that the Extremis virus was completely rewritten, its original volatility stripped away and re-engineered into a potent biological enhancer. Now, instead of posing a lethal threat, Extremis accelerates Tony's healing, boosts his endurance and reflexes, and provides bursts of energy at critical moments, granting him abilities well beyond those of ordinary men. Ethan's new compounds take that enhancement even further. Designed to complement Extremis, they work in perfect concert within Tony's body, reinforcing his muscles, bones, and nervous system until each is stronger than ever. On the surface of his suit, swarms of nanomachines flow like living creatures, instantly reshaping themselves at his command into weapons or additional armor. Most astonishing of all are the microscopic terminal particles of the virus, now so small they're nearly invisible. These particles have been fused deep into Tony's neural pathways, becoming an inseparable part of him. Under the virus's catalytic influence, every cell division is faster and more resilient. No longer must he depend solely on external plating. Through Extremis and Ethan's compounds, the armor and man have become one. Tony Stark has transcended the suit. He is the Iron Man. The fusion of man and machine hadn't simply strengthened Ethan's physique. It had unlocked a level of power and precision he'd never known before. His voice, laced with sardonic amusement, crackled through the suit's external speakers as if he weren't facing gods and supervillains on a knife's edge. He shifted his weight, every muscle poised for defense while his mind raced through potential strategies. The MK-99 was armed to the teeth. High-energy laser cannons capable of cutting through steel, anti-gravity thrusters for instant repositioning, and quantum disruptors specifically calibrated to neutralize divine magic, Thor's thunderous hammer strikes, and Loki's illusory tricks. A faint electromagnetic haze shimmered around him, the only visible trace of the suit's normally invisible magnetic shield. At Ethan's command, the levitation system wound down almost silently. He descended to the ground in a controlled glide, leaving behind ripples of dissipating energy. When his boots finally touched the pavement, he gave the armor on his forearm a measured tap, a quiet reminder of just how far he'd come and how ready he was for whatever came next. Ethan felt the MK-99 suit come alive around him. Its nanomechanical fibers shifted and realigned in a seamless dance, altering shape, color, and functionality in an instant to meet every new threat. Compared to its predecessor, this model's molecular lattice was both stronger and lighter, dramatically easing the wearer's burden without sacrificing an ounce of protection. Most extraordinary of all, the suit tapped into the energy coursing through Ethan's Extremis-enhanced biology to project what its designers called a vector pulse force field. With it, he could hurl debris like guided missiles, erect a near-impenetrable shield at a moment's notice, or strike foes from afar with devastating precision. He flexed his wrist. A pale blue halo of energy pulsed into existence around his forearm and flickered with raw power. "Stark, fall back, now!" Thor's booming warning cut through the rubble-strewn courtyard. He swung Mjolnir in a wide arc, sending a wave of spectral thunder rolling toward an approaching horde of undead warriors. Tony Stark didn't move. His gauntlet repulsors ignited in brilliant arcs of orange light. "I'm not leaving," he shot back. "If Hela wants a fight, she'll get one. Besides, under the laws of this castle, I have full authority to open fire on you, and this man." High atop the shattered battlements, the air stilled. From the darkness stepped Hela, the goddess of death, clad in obsidian armor, her raven-feathered cloak trailing like a shadow. At Tony's words, she paused, one elegant eyebrow lifting as she surveyed Ethan's shimmering force field and Thor's poised hammer alike. The moment stretched, charged with silent threat. Then Hela's lips curved into a slow, knowing smile. Hela turned to Ethan, with a wicked smile dancing at the corner of her lips. "Midgardian," she purred, "your courage is impressive, but ignorance can be its own tragedy. How long do you really think that iron shell will keep you safe?" Ethan's suit flickered as its AI ran a rapid analysis of Hela's energy signature and combat history. He clenched his jaw beneath the helmet, but refused to back down. "Ironhide, this armor is the fruit of every failure and breakthrough I've ever endured. As for you, you're nothing more than a myth come to life. The world has moved on, and your old tricks won't fly here." In the silence that followed, Ethan's mind raced through every strategic option: energy redirection, sonic resonance, even an experimental pulse weapon. He knew he was outmatched by a goddess of death, but as both scientist and soldier, he would never concede defeat. He leveled his voice and went for a psychological edge. "You know, this all feels uncomfortably familiar, Thor. Haven't we already seen enough Royal Asgardian drama? Tell me, who's the problem this time? The sister, or perhaps the spouse?" At that, Thor's expression shifted, a flicker of conflict crossing his stern features. Ethan realized that Tony's jibes were masking something far deeper, the helplessness and bitter irony of their family's tangled loyalties. As the god of thunder, he was sworn to defend Asgard, yet he also had to navigate the tempest of discord within his own bloodline. Even for a deity, that kind of pain and inner conflict was almost impossible to bear. Chapter 847, Another Battle for the Throne. "She's my sister, Hela, the goddess of death." Thor's tone held a mixture of frustration and resignation. Tony Stark's smirk froze at that revelation. Inwardly, he thought, this Asgardian family saga is bloodier than any Hollywood blockbuster. First Loki, now Hela. Couldn't they ever settle things without dragging Earth into their royal feud? He glanced toward the glittering city below, its millions of unsuspecting citizens living their lives in blissful ignorance. If ever there were a reminder of why he fought so hard to protect this world, this was it. "So this is another succession dispute?" Tony asked, his voice tinged with exasperation. "Why does it always end up on our doorstep?" He knew that whenever an Asgardian deity set foot here, the planet teetered on the brink of disaster. Last time it was Loki's mischief, now it was the wrath of a death goddess. Who would be next? Balder, god of light? Hoder, god of darkness? Or Tyr, god of war? Thor closed his eyes briefly, sorrow flickering across his face. Father banished her here, convinced that a mortal realm would imprison her for all time. He paused, staring out into the night, as if he could see the sealed gates that once confined his sister. "But I fear that seal has begun to crack." Ethan closed his eyes for a moment and took a steadying breath. "Ever since my father left, the magic that bound Hela has been weakening. It was only a matter of time before she broke free. Her power over death is uncontrollable. If we don't stop her, the fallout could destroy Asgard." Tony Stark's jaw went slack. After a beat, he managed a wry smile. "So your go-to solution is still shipping prisoners off to Midgard? Who exactly do you think we're dealing with here?" He muttered the complaint under his breath, but never let his guard down. His fingers hovered over the console, ready for anything. Then he asked the question everyone in the room was thinking. "Your father, Odin? He's gone? Dead? Left can only mean one thing, which means you're the new king of Asgard." Ethan nodded. He glanced down at his hands as if seeing the weight of his new crown imprinted on his palms. Finally he managed, "I never wanted this throne." Tony's gaze softened. He stepped forward, but his concern came out halting, unsure. "Hey, listen. I get it. My own dad left when I was too young to understand. Nobody hands you a guidebook for grief or for rulership." He paused, searching Ethan's eyes for any spark of relief. "You're not alone in this." Before Ethan could reply, a cold voice sliced through the room. "Have you finished?" Hela strode in, her cloak swirling like black smoke. "So you're planning to arrest me again?" Tony's fingers drifted away from the console. He shot a quick look at Ethan, who drew himself up to full height. Ethan met Hela's glare without flinching. "You'll answer for what you've done, Aunt Hela. No more chaos." Hela let out a cruel laugh. "We'll see if you're strong enough to stop me." He reached for his sword, but his grip trembled. He would not kill her, no matter how great the threat. Turning to Tony, Ethan said softly, "I can't bring myself to end her life. There has to be another way." Tony's eyes widened, then flicked to Hela, whose lips curved into a knowing smile. Power crackled at her fingertips as she took a step forward. In that moment, with the throne on his shoulders and battle on the horizon, Ethan realized saving Asgard would demand everything he had, and more. Ethan's plan was straightforward: defeat Hela, and then find a realm in which to lock her away. Asgard was out of the question. His father had already warned him that it was Hela's own domain, impossible to use as a prison. All he could do was hold her off until he could summon his mother to perform the final sealing ritual. But before he had a chance to send the signal, Hela struck. With a savage laugh, the goddess of death unleashed a hail of night sky swords that shimmered like falling stars. Thor leapt forward, and with a single sweep of his enchanted axe, cleaved dozens of blades in two. Still, he paused mid-swing, brow furrowed. They felt wrong. What had once been soft as silk now hit with the weight of iron. Tony Stark didn't wait to trust shields or magic. He raised his gauntlet and unleashed a torrent of high-energy repulsor beams, carving through the night sky swords and flaring toward Hela with blinding intensity. The beam struck her armor, and she barely blinked. Tilting her head, she offered a playful smile. "Not bad," she purred. "It hurts a little, but it's nowhere near enough." Tony's expression darkened. His repulsors could penetrate 100 meters of reinforced alloy in an instant. Against Hela, they were barely a nuisance. Tony Stark knew better than anyone that facing Hela with conventional weapons was like smashing an egg against a boulder. His Mk-99 armor had been built to confront the universe's most extreme threats, and its deadliest trump card was the high-temperature extremist mode. Without a second thought, Stark resolved to become a living furnace, incinerating every obstacle in his path. At his command, the armor's microreactor linked seamlessly with the extremist system. What had begun as a simple biological enhancer transformed into a colossal energy converter, rewiring every cell in Tony's body into a raw power source. That energy surged through the suit in an ever-rising crescendo, forging an internal storm that threatened to break containment. On the surface of the armor, once cold metal began to glow molten red, far hotter than any ordinary flame. Stark felt the heat radiate outward as the reactor neared critical mass. In that moment, the inventor-turned-warrior stood ready. A walking inferno poised to meet the ancient Asgardian goddess and burn her magic to ash. The glow from Ethan's Mk-99 armor was like molten lava beneath a dying sun, blinding, fierce, and alive. The air around him shimmered and warped in the heat, casting the world in wavering shadows as though reality itself had momentarily softened. Power thrummed through him, raw and limitless, an energy capable of toppling stars and reducing kingdoms to ash. "Hela," Ethan's voice rang out through the armor's speakers, steady, unyielding. "You may command legions of the dead, but in the face of this power, everything you've built will turn to nothing." He curled his fingers into steely fists, as if summoning the very heart of the cosmos for his next strike. Across the battlefield, Hela's lips curved into a playful, almost mocking smile. She drew herself to her full height, her dark eyes gleaming with defiance. "Then show me, Ethan." She taunted, voice rich with challenge. "Let's see if you can truly erase a goddess." With a sudden, explosive movement, Ethan thrust both arms forward. In that instant, the Mk-99 armor ignited like a meteor breaking free of gravity's chains. A searing column of light, brighter than lightning, erupted from his gauntlets, carving a luminous path straight toward Hela. The night shattered around them as two unstoppable forces met in a collision that would decide the fate of worlds. Ethan unleashed an ultra-high-temperature plasma beam, its intensity driven by the desperate virus's overheat mode. The scorching discharge sliced through the darkness, igniting the air in its path and reducing everything it touched to smoldering ruin. Hela's eyes narrowed. She knew all too well the catastrophic potential of that attack and refused to underestimate it. With a swift gesture, she raised her right hand, summoning a brilliant azure light that coalesced into her famed Hand of Glory. This was no mere flash of power, but a refined expression of her mastery over Asgardian sorcery, an arcane conduit capable of channeling cosmic energy into a strike that could shatter the toughest defenses and rend an enemy's spirit. The two forces met mid-air in a blinding explosion. Ethan's searing plasma beam slammed into Hela's glowing Hand of Glory, and for an instant, the sky itself seemed to catch fire. Brilliant arcs of blue and gold erupted outward, accompanied by a deafening roar that echoed across the battlefield. As the light subsided, both combatants held their ground, locked in a deadly stalemate, and neither was willing to back down. The air itself seemed to rip open, coalescing into a vast vortex of energy that relentlessly sucked in everything nearby. Chapter 848. Thor, Sirius Hela's fury erupted like a volcanic blast, shaking the ground and twisting the very air around her. Veins throbbed on her forehead, a clear sign of power pushed to its limits. A tide of emerald magic swelled around her, as if every ounce of nature's life force were being ruthlessly drawn in and transformed into her unique power of death. This was more than a spectacular display. It was a distortion of existence itself. With a deafening roar, she bent the earth to her will. The ground quaked, cracking open as countless black weapons surged upward from the depths of hell. Swords, spears, and jagged blades ripped through bedrock and soil, carrying the chill breath of death into the sky. They twisted and coiled in midair, forming a dark torrent that blotted out the battlefield in an instant. This inky hail didn't just fall, it swallowed light and life alike, plunging all who stood beneath it into a suffocating gloom. Each jagged shard carried the power to tear flesh and spirit apart, leaving nothing but despair in its wake. As the black rain fell, the very air seemed to choke under its weight, and hope withered in every heart. Ethan vaulted through the air, narrowly avoiding Hela's ebony spears as they tore at the very fabric of reality. Each impact rang out like a maddening shriek, fracturing space itself into jagged rifts. From those gaping wounds, something far more sinister stirred, straining to break free and consume the world. Desperately, Ethan weaved between arcs of destructive energy and undulating voids, his heart hammering in his chest. There was no safe ground, only the endless turbulence of battle. Then he spotted Thor, hammer raised against the goddess's relentless assault, lightning crackling around his gauntleted hand. Panting, Ethan dove behind a shattered obelisk, its broken stones offering the only cover he could find. He shouted over the din, "Thor, you never warned me. Hela was so far beyond Loki's power." Thor's expression hardened with regret. "Ethan, Loki was never my true son." He shook his head, as if trying to dispel an unwelcome memory. "Even so, I never imagined Hela's might would be this overwhelming." He drew in a deep breath, not just for air, but to steel his resolve. Around them, the world trembled on the brink of collapse, and the battle for its very soul had only just begun. Ethan stood at the heart of the storm, feeling the very fabric of the cosmos surge into his chest. His muscles coiled with raw, explosive power as crackling currents of electricity raced beneath his skin. Every spark intertwined and intensified, converging into a single unstoppable torrent that pulsed through his veins and into the legendary tomahawk he gripped. In his hand, the thunder god's battle axe flared to life. Brilliant, pure lightning danced across its haft and blade, illuminating the skies above Asgard and tearing through the cloudscape to flood all 9 realms with blinding light. A low, thunderous roar echoed from the weapon itself. Ethan could almost hear the hammering heart of a god within its core. The lightning arcs writhed like living serpents, leaping and weaving through the air before coalescing into an immense, crackling sphere of power. It hovered at the edge of oblivion, poised to unleash devastation on any who dared stand against it. In that moment, Ethan and the battle axe became one, an unstoppable force of thunder, ready to shape the fate of the coming battle. Ethan's very heartbeat thrummed in time with his battle axe, and each fleeting thought was transmuted into Thunder's raw power. He was no longer simply a warrior. He had become the living storm, the most formidable force in the world. With a single, earth-shaking swing, he brought the axe crashing down. For an instant, time itself seemed to halt. The boundary between heaven and earth quivered, as though some invisible rift had torn the sky open to reveal the universe's hidden secrets. Boom, boom, boom! The roar shattered the silence of the world. From the blade erupted billions of thunderbolts, each one like a colossal silver dragon tearing through the air. They crackled with blinding speed and cataclysmic force, weaving a luminous web of lightning that bathed the heavens in pure, searing light. Under the onslaught of this storm, even Hela's necrotic energies and her night sky sword once feared as irresistible instruments of death, crumbled into insignificance before the apocalypse of thunder Ethan had unleashed. They glowed with the purest energy in the universe, each bolt locking onto Hela's death magic, like a falcon zeroing in on its prey, swift, merciless, and precise. Her once raging black torrents were shredded by roaring thunder, torn apart like brittle leaves in a gale. One by one, they collapsed into tiny inky embers that winked out of existence. Hela's face flushed with humiliation. In Asgard, her power over death had been unrivaled, a force that could swallow life itself and reduce entire realms to nothingness. But here, on foreign soil, her strength was severely diminished. Her dark currents, meant to crush all before them, fizzled like fragile bubbles under Thor's relentless storm, bursting at the slightest touch and vanishing without a trace. Under the weight of Thor's thunderous assault, she could only muster a weak, faltering defense, her eyes darting desperately for any sliver of advantage. Then, with a roar that rattled the very sky, Thor unleashed his mighty battle-axe, imbued with the essence of Pei-Ran Mo-Yu. Invincible and unstoppable, it hurtled through the air, its razor-sharp blade aimed unwaveringly at Hela's chest. "It's too fast to dodge, or even block," Hela rasped as Thor's axe exploded in a blaze of thunder and lightning. In an instant, most of her body shattered into ash. Thor withdrew his weapon and strode forward, eyes never leaving the smoking remnants of her form. Only her torso and head remained, trembling with pain. Stranded here, far from Asgard, her healing had slowed to a crawl. "My sister," Thor said, voice chillingly calm. "Next I will bind you with my divine power, just as Father once bound me, and this time the sentence will be eternal." He raised the axe, its edge still crackling. This was no ordinary stormbreaker. Forged anew from hellfire, the essence of Mjolnir, and Thor's own godly energy, it surpassed anything he'd wielded before. Add to that the power he'd drawn from his battles against the Saiyans, each death and rebirth honing him sharper, and he was now stronger than the Thor who first claimed this weapon. Even if Hela were to return to Asgard at full strength, she would find herself no match for him. He had tested his thunder and lightning before, restraining himself to see if she might relent, but now, seeing her defiance unchanged, he was ready to finish this fight. Chapter 849. The New World. Devil May Cry Thor normally keeps his power below 1%. But the moment he grows serious, that figure soars past 10, enough force to make the stars tremble. He laughs off the blistering heat of neutron stars that could melt anything in an instant. With a simple flick of his wrist, his battle-axe, crackling with concentrated divine energy, cleaves through blocking asteroids as if they were nothing but dust. This is Thor unleashed. He reserves his full might for the Saiyans. His sister Hela, formidable though she is, pales in comparison. "Hela," Tony muttered, drawing his arm across his chest as he hovered at a safe distance. The spectacle he'd just witnessed still rattled his nerves. Hela refused to bow. She stared at Thor, her gaze blazing with hatred and wounded pride. Tony checked in with the upgraded Jarvis. Its latest analysis confirmed the terrifying truth. In that single, focused burst, Thor had poured out energy equivalent to 100 times all the lightning Earth has ever generated since its formation. And he'd confined every joule of it to that pinpoint location, never even drilling down into the planet's interior. It was a stark reminder of just how precise and how absolute Thor's control over his own power truly is. Based on the latest readings, it's still possible the very ground beneath us could give way. Thor turned to Tony Stark. "Stark, the threat has been neutralized. I'll be on my way." Tony blinked, momentarily speechless. He'd always known Thor as the team's unshakable bulwark, less overtly imposing than a green-skinned giant or a master sorcerer, but no less formidable. And now, Thor's power had surged to an entirely new level. Aside from Ethan, he was the only one who ever made Tony feel like an ant beside an elephant. Ethan, who'd been watching the fight between Sol and Hela unfold, let out a low whistle. Incredible, Thor. From where he stood, Ethan could sense the raw cosmic energy radiating from the God of Thunder, the kind of force even Thanos couldn't match, Infinity Stones in hand. And in this timeline, the Mad Titan had grown even stronger. In their last conflict, Ethan had almost given Thanos a guided tour of the stone's capabilities, step by step, watching the Titan's awe turn to hunger. Now that Thanos had slipped away, there was no doubt he'd return, deeply obsessed with mastering infinity's boundless power. Ethan paused to collect his thoughts. The original storyline had felt rushed. Thanos' wisdom alone wasn't enough to slow the pace. With each iteration, however, Thanos had grown stronger, and Ethan himself had reached his 10th version. Now was the moment to act. He bent the currents of time once more, determined to continue exploring this new world. In the blink of an eye, he arrived at an abandoned pier. A cool, salty breeze rolled in from the sea, brushing his face like a quiet greeting. Before him lay a vast expanse of blue water, each wave catching the sunlight and sending it dancing across the surface. The horizon blurred where sea met sky, forming a breathtaking panorama that filled him with awe. Suddenly, the scene shifted again. Ethan stood at the edge of a small coastal town. Its streets were so impeccably clean that the polished stones reflected every passerby like dark mirrors. Each slab bore the faint sheen of careful maintenance and whispered of long-forgotten histories. Tall spires rose along the main road, their stained glass windows fracturing the sun into jewel-toned patterns that lent the town an unmistakable aura of sanctity. As Ethan wandered down the avenue, he realized nearly every resident was clad in a simple white hood, their silent procession adding a layer of mystery to the place. Ethan halted in mid-step the moment the deep, sonorous bell began its peal. One by one, the townspeople fell silent, clasped their hands, closed their eyes, and bowed their heads in unison. He knew better than to break this sacred stillness. After a few solemn minutes, the last echoes faded, and life in Destiny Town resumed its leisurely pace. Strolling along the narrow, winding lanes, Ethan took in every detail with the keen eyes of an outsider. That was his purpose here, catalog every face, every habit, every rumor floating through these streets. In the heart of town, he came upon a massive stone monument, rising like a timeless sentinel against the gray sky. Pitted by wind and rain, it nonetheless stood unwavering, as if it guarded the very soul of the island. Ethan paused beneath its shadow. He'd read everything there was to know about Fuduna Island before stepping through the portal, yet seeing the monument in person felt different. This was an isolated community called Destiny Town, and what struck him most was the locals' faith. But they didn't worship saints or angels. Their reverence was reserved for devils. Magic swordsman Sparta. The name burned in his memory, unmistakable and fraught with legend. He shook his head, an amused smile tugging at his lips. Of all the worlds he could have landed in, he'd ended up in the realm of Devil May Cry. And with that realization, Ethan pushed off from the monument and pressed forward, curiosity alight, ready to face whatever demons this island held. Long ago, when Emperor Mons of the Demon Realm amassed his forces to breach the barrier and conquer the human lands, one man stood against him. Demon swordsman Ethan, master of the blade and unshakable in his conviction, stepped forward alone. With every stroke of his legendary sword, he drove the demons back and preserved the fragile peace of the mortal world. From that day on, Ethan's name was spoken with reverence, becoming a byword for courage and justice. Stories of his deeds spread by word of mouth, gathering legendary colors as they passed from one generation to the next. On the Isle of Fortuna, where Ethan once set foot, his presence was said to have bathed the land in a warm, golden light. His victory over Monda's dark legions did more than repel an invasion. It moved the island's people deeply. United by awe and gratitude, they formed a brotherhood calling themselves the Demon Sword Order, pledging to honor Ethan's example and continue shielding Fortuna from demonic threats. To this day, the islanders commemorate Ethan's great sacrifice, each year with the Festival of the Magic Sword. Under banners emblazoned with his crest, they wield enchanted blades in mock battle, offer prayers at dawn, and tell anew the tale of how one man's steadfast heart turned the tide against darkness, ensuring Ethan's spirit lives on in every flash of steel. On the island of Fortuna, all authority rests with a single, fearsome faction, the Order of the Demon Sword. Though they call themselves an order, they do not worship any god in the traditional sense. Instead, they hold an almost reverential awe for the so-called demon hero of Sparta. To them, imitating the ruthless discipline of Spartan warriors is the path to spiritual purification, physical perfection, and ultimately the island's defense against demonic invasion. Every member of the order trains in swordsmanship from dawn to dusk and organizes ceaseless patrols along Fortuna's shores and forests, ever on the lookout for signs of supernatural trespassers. Yet their devotion quickly slides into fanaticism. Anyone, or anything, deemed a threat to their creed or to the safety of the island is labeled heretical and must be wiped out without mercy. In practice, the Order has become Fortuna's sole enforcer of law and order, dispensing swift, brutal justice to all who cross them. Ethan, however, could not be less interested in their grim politics. He's far more preoccupied with the fact that he's somehow landed in the world of Devil May Cry. And from everything he's seen so far, the stark towers, the crimson-skinned fiends, it looks like he's just dropped into the opening of Devil May Cry 4. Which, if he's right, means Nero is probably still that whip-handed kid he remembers. Ethan glanced over at Nero. Gone was the wide-eyed child he remembered. In his place stood a brooding teenager, this cream Nero with his features and delicate charm. He couldn't have been more different from the hardened gangster Nero who would appear later, leaving Ethan to wonder if someone else had slipped into the role entirely. Chapter 850, Cream Nero. Ethan sensed that the sun in the Devil May Cry realm carried a peculiar energy. In other worlds, starlight feels soothing and warm. Here, the sunlight was at once searing and frigid, like a marriage of fire and ice. He wondered what strange influence such a sun might exert on him as he pressed onward. Soon, a soaring edifice emerged through the dusky haze, the Destiny Town branch of the Magic Sword Order, a cathedral of both majesty and sanctity. Its slender spire stretched skyward like a razor-sharp blade, as if daring to pierce the clouds and touch the domain of the gods. Bathed in the last rays of the setting sun, the church's silhouette glowed with a pale golden radiance that lent it an almost otherworldly solemnity. The building's design married the grandeur of Western ecclesiastical architecture with fresh, inventive flourishes. Every stone and tile spoke of the craftsman's meticulous skill and their unshakable devotion to faith. As Ethan drew closer, he felt the weight of centuries of religious fervor pressing upon him, and he knew that whatever awaited inside, it would not be ordinary. Ethan paused before the church's grand facade, its stone walls carved with intricate patterns, scenes from Scripture, David and Goliath, Moses parting the Red Sea, woven seamlessly with symbols of strength and divine protection. The effect was humbling, drawing every passerby into silent awe. The heavy wooden doors stood shut, their iron cross inlay serving as both a beacon to the faithful and a dire warning to any lurking evil. The street outside lacked the bustle of the city center, but pulsed with its own energy. Market stalls lined the cobblestones while vendors shouted their wares, everything from daily provisions to enchanted trinkets. Townsfolk hurried past or stopped to exchange greetings, their faces alight with a shared love of life and hope for tomorrow. Yet beneath this calm, Ethan felt an unmistakable tension, an oppressive aura unique to the Demon Sword Order. At the church entrance stood two of its knights, their armor gleaming in the morning light like silent sentinels. Their presence was so commanding that everything else around them seemed to fade into insignificance. The knights' uniforms are a pristine white, a deliberate emblem of their purity and nobility. At each knight's hip hangs a finely crafted sword, their sworn weapon to defend the faith and uphold peace. The cut of the tunic balances functionality and grace. Its long, skirted hem sways with the breeze, lending an air of heroism without hindering motion in combat. Crimson filigree arcs across the white fabric like living embers, infusing the armor with warmth and vitality. Far from mere decoration, these red motifs are the Order's heraldic marks, each pattern steeped in ancient meaning and power, signifying rank and duty. Completing the ensemble, a white hood drapes over the shoulders, concealing a polished steel helmet beneath. Inspired by medieval knightly design, the helmet's Y-shaped visor frames the wearer's face, projecting an aura of solemn majesty. Forged from reinforced steel, it offers comprehensive protection, shielding the knight's head from every blow. Knights in hooded cloaks and gleaming helmets moved like living shadows, their faces lost in darkness. Today was the demonic sword festival. Ethan kept his distance, not wanting to draw attention. He wandered toward the old stone church at the heart of the square, where slivers of sunlight filtered through stained glass, painting the interior in shifting hues of red and gold. Inside, Gilly's voice rose clear and majestic, weaving through the vaulted naves. Her song honored the courage and sacrifice of Sparta's defenders, a solemn tribute to heroes long past. Ethan leaned against the cool exterior wall, absorbing every note with a quiet, contented smile. Suddenly a chill ran down his spine. His calm, dark eyes sharpened as he scanned the rooftops opposite the church. Beyond them lay a narrow alley, bathed in shadow. There, a silent swarm of tiny, ebony-winged insects hove, red just out of reach. Though small, each one pulsed with corrupt energy straight from the abyss. Ethan's heart quickened. The demonic sword festival was a celebration, but these creatures heralded something far more sinister. Ethan watched as the countless demonic insects, mindless creatures driven purely by instinct, swarmed deeper into the alley. Though individually harmless, in mass they formed a writhing, nightmarish tide. One by one, they were drawn toward some unseen summons and vanished into the darkness. A harsh screech of metal scraping metal suddenly shattered the stillness. From the heart of the alley emerged a grotesque figure, the Devil's Scarecrow. Its patchwork body of old burlap sacks and fraying ropes looked as if it had clawed its way out of a garbage heap. Each jerky movement was horribly uncoordinated, yet carried an unmistakable menace. In place of its right arm, a blood-stained executioner's blade gleamed coldly in the moonlight. Every arc of that blade seemed to split the very air, bringing with it the stench of death. Despite its unsteady gait, the Scarecrow moved with terrifying speed and purpose. This encounter was nothing more than the overture to the demonic sword festival. The true trial was yet to come. Ethan's footsteps echoed on the cobblestones as he approached the festival grounds, each step resonating with urgency and steely resolve. The night held its breath, and Ethan braced himself for the horrors that lay ahead. Ethan stood on the cracked ground, eyes narrowed, when an invisible force ripped the earth apart at his feet. In an instant, a vast chasm yawned before him. From its depths rose a black blur that straightened into a sleek, spherical form hurtling upward. As it neared Ethan, the shape sprouted grotesque limbs, each tipped with wicked claws, and revealed a gaping maw bristling with fangs. The creature before him was an assault demon soldier. Its roar shook the air as it launched itself at Ethan. Yet his face betrayed no surprise, only icy calm. He didn't flinch or dodge. Instead, he lifted his bandaged arm in a silent challenge. The demon's claws sliced through space with enough force to tear flesh from bone, but when they slammed into Ethan's forearm, they struck like against bronze, leaving only a few pale scratches on his skin. A cold smile curved Ethan's lips. Seizing the moment, he gripped the creature's triangular head, cracking through the demon's impromptu guard as easily as snapping dry twigs. The demon soldier shrieked in shock and pain, its momentum arresting instantly as Ethan held it captive in his unyielding grasp. The assault demon soldier thrashed wildly, its anguished shrieks piercing the air as it fought in vain to escape. Nero showed no mercy. With a single, powerful heave, he hurled the creature like a rag doll into a massive oak. The impact struck with a thunderous crack that reverberated through the forest. The trunk shuddered violently, bark splintering as long fissures raced across its surface, threatening to bring the ancient tree crashing down at any moment. Chapter 851, I Am Your Father. The demon soldier's mangled form was wedged deep into the oak's trunk, only half of its twisted body visible as it writhed in agony. Its feeble struggles, pitiful against Ethan's imposing figure, were like those of a trapped animal, doomed and powerless. Ethan offered no mercy. He took measured steps toward the shattered tree, his eyes alight with unwavering resolve. Drawing a slow, steady breath, he braced himself, every muscle coiled with pent-up power. Then, with a single devastating punch, he unleashed it. A roaring crack split the air as his fists struck the demon's midsection. The ancient oak, which would have required 3 men to encircle, splintered under the blow, chunks of wood and bark raining down in a cloud of dust. The demon soldier's body ruptured, severed nearly in two, its gore painting the earth beneath. Life drained from its eyes as it gazed up at Ethan, terror and defiance mingling in its final expression. Then, with one last ragged gasp, it was gone. Silence reclaimed the clearing, broken only by the settling dust and the distant cries of retreating demons. Ethan stood over the corpse, chest heaving, the weight of what he'd done settling around him like a shroud. Whatever revelations awaited him, fatherhood or fate, there would be no turning back now. Ethan lowered his sword as the final hellspawn slumped to the ground. The fight had been so swift and savage that the sudden silence felt almost unreal. He panted, every muscle tensed, scanning the crumbled stones and twisted metal for any sign of movement. Without warning, a dozen demonic scarecrows burst from the shadows, their ragged forms closing in on him. Ethan rolled his shoulders and glanced back toward the ruined church, where Gilly waited anxiously among the broken pews. Of all the Spartans, he was the youngest. And, despite being only a quarter demon by blood, he'd proven himself the fiercest. Dante and Virgil might carry more demon heritage, but Ethan's raw strength had earned him their grudging respect. He shook off the memory of those who'd feared his awakening powers he still barely understood or controlled. No more hiding. This was his moment. With a steely grin, Ethan drew his revolver and opened fire. Bang! 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 Each shot tore through straw and tattered cloth, reducing the scarecrows to drifting shards. As the last splinter fell, silence reclaimed the battlefield once more. Ethan lowered his gun, ready for whatever horrors might be waiting in the next shadow. Ethan, lean, silver-haired, and clad in threadbare red, perched on a nearby rooftop, watching the church besieged by demons. For a heartbeat he hesitated, then vaulted down and sprinted toward the shattered doors. Inside, Nero's world went silent. The horde of demon scarecrows that had advanced on him lay in splintered heaps. From each broken puppet swarmed a cloud of jet-black insects, which scurried off into the shadows. Nero raised his eyes just in time to see Ethan step through the doorway. The newcomer wore a pristine white trench coat and carried a pair of glorious custom-built sand eagles. Their noble golden frames were inscribed with intricate, arcane filigree, and beneath each muzzle glinted a razor-sharp blade. Ethan slipped the pistols into their holsters with calm precision. "No need to thank me," he said quietly. Nero staggered back, shock rippling across his face. "My son, I've finally found you." Ethan froze, confusion knitting his brow. "Walter?" Nero's own eyes went wide. "Walter? I'm Nero." Ethan blinked. "Your name's Nero. Short white hair, orphanage. Everyone called you Nero." Nero's expression softened, as if hearing his own name spoken for the first time. For as long as he could remember, he'd been alone. Now this stranger in white stood before him, guns holstered, and hope, strange and delicate, took root in his chest. Ethan stepped forward, his expression heavy with regret. "I know you've got every reason to hate me," he began quietly, "but I was the one who left you at that orphanage." Nero froze. He stared at the man standing in front of him, this stranger calling himself family. For a long moment, he couldn't find the words. Finally, he spat out, "Get out of my way. I have no father." He tried to turn away, but Ethan reached out, catching his shoulder. "I'm sorry I abandoned you," Ethan said, his voice trembling. "I had no choice. I did it to save your mother." Nero's heart tightened. "Save my mother?" His voice was equal parts incredulous and desperate. Ethan nodded, swallowing hard. "Yes, demons from the Nether lured us into a trap. They kidnapped both you and your mother. I managed to rescue you." He paused, his eyes clouding with pain. "But she was taken back. So I did what I thought was best. I left you at the orphanage, wrapped in that black shawl, hoping you'd be safe until I could come for you." Nero's mind reeled. He'd missed family all his life. He knew that much was true, but this explanation felt unreal. Kidnappings, devil realms, sacrificial plans. He'd never dealt with anything so extraordinary. And yet, somewhere deep inside, a spark of longing flickered. Could this man really be his father? Could he have risked everything to save the woman Nero barely remembered, his mother? He took a shaky breath, searching Ethan's eyes for any sign of deceit. The devilish chaos of his past suddenly felt small compared to the storm of emotions raging between them. The truth, whatever it was, had just changed everything. "I'm sorry, Nero. I couldn't save your mother." Ethan's voice was low, and for a moment Nero just stared at him. "Why?" he finally managed, his heart pounding. He'd thrown himself into the demon realm without hesitation. How could Ethan have failed? "It was too late," Ethan said, regret heavy in every syllable. A tightening knot of grief twisted in Nero's chest. "Is it because you saved me first?" Ethan shook his head. "No, It was my own weakness. All these tragedies happen because people like me aren't strong enough. If I'd been as powerful as a Spartan warrior, I could have saved both you and your mother." Shame weighed on Ethan's shoulders. Nero reached out, struggling for the right words. "It's not your fault. It's the demons." He took a steadying breath. "I came back only to check on you. Seeing you alive, that was a relief." Ethan's gaze drifted toward the doorway, as though he were already halfway out of it. Nero's voice sharpened. "You're leaving?" Ethan hesitated. "I can't stay. There are more innocents in danger. I have to hunt those demons before they hurt anyone else. Besides, we haven't really talked since we were kids." Nero swallowed hard. "Then go, but promise me you'll come back safe." Ethan reached behind his back and drew a deadly broadsword, then tossed it to Nero. "A gift for you," he said. Nero caught the blade easily, his eyes widening at its weight and craftsmanship. He had grown accustomed to lighter weapons since his own sword, the Crimson Queen, had been sidelined for repairs. Holding something this substantial in his hands again stirred a familiar thrill. "What is this?" Nero asked, turning the weapon over to study its rune-etched steel. "One of my personal arms," Ethan replied with a grin. "The magic sword Apophis." Nero's thoughts drifted to the Crimson Queen, his signature broadsword, custom reinforced by his own hand. In its prime, it outclassed the Order's standard caliburns in both durability and raw power. A specialized charging core could amplify every swing, and the hilt hit a throttle-like trigger. Press it, and a thin jet of flammable fluid would spray from the blade's edge and burst into flame. But before Nero's right hand fully mutated, he'd faced a brutal strike demon soldier and run dangerously low on EX energy. In a last-ditch gamble, he vented every drop of EX into the Crimson Queen's drive. The result was catastrophic overload. The propulsion unit literally burned out. He'd sent the sword off to the tech department, and that was the reason he entered the 4th generation without it. Now, holding Apophis, Nero felt that old excite meant return. The broadsword's arcane core thrummed against his palm, and the balance was perfect. He smiled up at Ethan. "Thank you," he said, sheathing Apophis at his side. "This means a lot." Ethan merely nodded, pleased to see his friend wielding a proper sword once more. Chapter 852, The Demonic Sword. Apophis Nero stared in awe at the massive blade in Ethan's hand. This was no ordinary sword. It was Apophis, a weapon steeped in legend and dread. Veins of crimson light pulsed beneath its steel surface, like trapped flames, or the anger of countless souls forged into solid blood. Each flicker seemed to whisper of past glories and forgotten tragedies. The radiance was so fierce that where Nero gripped the hilt, his skin turned translucent. He could see the delicate webbing of veins and the pale gleam of bone beneath. The sword thrummed with power, so much so that the handle felt warm and almost alive in his palm. Ethan's voice broke the silent reverence. "Apophis isn't just a sword. It devours your fury, your pain, your hatred, even your will to fight, and transforms all of it into strength. Its strikes leave wounds that refuse to heal. This blade has been my constant companion for years." Nero found he couldn't release it. The heft alone felt like the promise of unbridled might, every bit as potent as the famed Crimson Queen. He let his fingertips drift along the blade's edge, shivering at the sudden duality of heat and cold under his skin. In that moment, Nero understood why Apophis was feared and revered by warriors throughout the ages. It was not a mere weapon. It was a force unto itself, bound to the darkest passions of those who dared to wield it. He felt the sword's immense, almost living power, the kind that could turn the tide of battle and even reshape fate itself. But he also understood the terrible price that such power demanded. Firmly, he thrust the blade back toward Ethan. "You're the one who gave this to me," he said. "What will you do without it? Besides, I already have my own weapon." Ethan reached out and caught the sword by its jeweled hilt, but he only held it for a moment. He shook his head and smiled gently. "You need it far more than I do." As Nero watched, the gleaming runes along the blade's edge seemed to glow in answer. The gift of Apophis had unlocked something in him, long-buried hopes, resentments, a longing for a father who'd been absent half his life. Now suddenly, Ethan was here, offering far more than a sword. He pushed the weapon forward again, his voice soft but unwavering. "Take it, Nero. You are my son, yes, but you are also your own man. I believe you can master this power and turn it into a weapon for good." Despite how much he coveted the sword, Nero shook his head. "I can't," he said, voice tight. "It's yours, my father's. How could I ever protect anyone if I take your weapon?" He clenched his fists, torn between gratitude and pride. Ethan's eyes were warm as he laid a hand on Nero's shoulder. "This blade isn't mine anymore," he said quietly. "It belongs to you now. Your path is yours to walk, and sometimes the greatest strength a warrior can find is the courage to accept the help he's offered." Nero stared at the sword, its metal glinting in the fading light. At last he exhaled, his grip slipping forward until his hand closed firmly around the hilt. The runes flared once, then settled into a steady pulse that matched his own heartbeat. He met Ethan's gaze and nodded. "Then I'll learn to wield it," he vowed. "Not as your son, but as a guardian in my own right." With that, the two of them stood side by side, the weight of the sword between them, both a promise of duty, of power, and of a bond newly forged. Nero shifted uncomfortably. "So, don't you want to see how I've been all these years?" Ethan couldn't help a small smile at Nero's awkwardness. "I've been doing pretty well," he replied, keeping his tone light. He accepted Nero's invitation to visit Gilly and Credo together. Without warning, the sharp crack of gunfire and panicked screams erupted from the direction of the church. Nero's face paled. "Gilly!" he cried, and bolted toward the commotion. Ethan called after him with a grin. "Hey, just because you've got a girlfriend now doesn't mean you can ditch your old friends." Yet as he ran, he reminded himself of what had happened here before. He knew it was Dante who'd tried to kill the Pope, only for Nero to intervene at the last second. According to the official chronicle, years earlier in the game's storyline, the reigning pontiff was Solemnus, a former head of the Knights Order known as Sanctus. Ambitious and ruthless, Sanctus had quietly poisoned Solemnus to claim the papal throne. Not long after, deep within the Castle of Destiny, he encountered a mysterious stranger who vanished as abruptly as they'd appeared. From that day on, Sanctus nurtured a grand, terrible scheme to harness demonic power, not only to destroy demons, but to dominate the world itself. Virgil, the elusive son of Sparta, brother of Dante, and father of Nero, was at the center of it all. His true patron, Sanctus, had grand ambitions, to build a colossal weapon he called God, a device designed first to draw demons into the human realm and turn our world into hell. Then, when chaos reigned, Sanctus would unleash God to annihilate the demons. In the wake of that victory, he planned to proclaim the return of Sparta's deity, earning the awe and devotion of all humanity. With the world united under one faith, the demonic sword order would hold unquestioned power. Sanctus dubbed this audacious scheme Relief. To bring relief to life, Sanctus launched a secret research program. He entrusted his loyal lieutenant, Agnes, with the study of demonic energy. From Agnes's experiments sprang the ritual known as Return to Heaven, a ceremony that fused human subjects, or in some cases inanimate objects, with demonic power, producing entirely new beings. A number of cultists volunteered for the rite, emerging convinced they were reborn as angels, though they had in fact become demons. Those who failed the ritual lost their sanity and were judged nothing more than devils by the Order's knights, and put to death. Among the worst tragedies were the deaths of Gilly and Credo's parents, slaughtered by believers twisted beyond recognition by a botched return to heaven. The cathedral known as Return to Heaven, the very site chosen for the Demon Sword Festival, at last stood complete. Its presence had already strengthened the Order's influence, but Sanctus remained unsatisfied. He summoned Agnes and demanded the rapid forging of an even greater weapon, drawing on vast deposits of demonic ore. When the colossal blade finally emerged, its surface gleaming like liquid silver, it was christened the Savior, though some in hushed tones called it God. Yet no legend heralded its power without a caveat. To awaken the Savior, one needed not only overwhelming magical force, but the rare, fabled blood of Sparta himself. One afternoon, Letty was going about her usual business, hunting demons for hire, when a sudden disturbance drew her attention. A squad of armored fiends appeared, methodically scavenging arcane artifacts from every building in their path. She sprang into action, blades flashing, only to discover these creatures were no ordinary devils. Their disciplined tactics and uncanny resilience forced her into a strategic retreat. Intrigued and unsettled by their origin, Letty plunged into her investigation. What she uncovered was alarming. A shadowy cabal known as the Devil's Sword Cult was at work, its ambitions far darker than a simple demon hunt. Realizing the threat was beyond her to handle alone, she set out for the Devil May Cry headquarters, determined to enlist Dante's help. Dante listened as Letty laid out her findings, and despite recognizing the cult's ties to his father's legacy, he remained coolly indifferent. Still, Letty knew that if the Devil's Sword Cult truly sought to unleash the Savior, even Dante's bravado might not be enough to stop what was coming next. Tracy had been eavesdropping on Ethan's every move, and her curiosity finally got the better of her. Under cover of night, she filched 4 of the most powerful artifacts in Ethan's possession: the Impact Steel Gilgamesh, the catastrophic Pandora device, the Infinite Sword Lucifer, and the legendary Sword of Sparta. With these in hand, she CK-mailed Ethan into continuing his assignments for her, leaving him trapped between her schemes and the rival affections of 2 meddlesome women. Dressed in the guise of Gloria, Tracy made her way to the holy city of Fortuna. There she presented the 4 artifacts to Pope Sanctus himself, convincing him that salvation was at hand. Sanctus, ever eager for divine power, entrusted these relics to Cardinal Agnes, who channeled their immense energies to open a miniature hellgate. At the same time, the Sword of Sparta was set upon its altar to awaken the long-dormant Savior. Meanwhile, Ethan arrived in Fortuna under the cover of dusk. He rendezvoused with Tracy, still pretending to be Gloria, and learned of the upcoming Demon Sword Festival. Realizing this grand celebration would draw out Sanctus and his new powers, Ethan resolved to end the Pope's reign once and for all. On the night of the festival, beneath torchlit banners and the clash of gleaming blades, Ethan struck. With the city in uproar, he slipped through the crowd and reached Sanctus's ceremonial dais. When the Pope raised the Sword of Sparta to declare the dawn of salvation, Ethan lunged forward, his own blade finding its mark. Sanctus crumpled, and the festival erupted into chaos. Amid the turmoil, Ethan found himself challenged by Knight Nero of the Order, a towering figure in black armor. Sparks flew as swords met, each strike echoing with raw power. During the fierce exchange, Nero's gauntleted hands split open, revealing a writhing mass of demonic energy beneath. The air crackled. Ethan felt that same unearthly force stirring within him, as if drawn to Nero's dark gift. In that moment, he knew the true battle was only just beginning. Ethan slipped through the shadowed corridors just as Dante's silenced pistol barked once. In that single, decisive shot, Sanctus, High Priest of the Celestial Order, collapsed onto the marble floor. For a moment, the chamber fell silent, save for the soft echo of Dante's footsteps receding into the nave. But Sanctus's death would not stand. At dawn, within the soaring arches of the Grand Basilica, the sacred resurrection rite began. Incantations filled the vaulted ceiling, candles flickered in unison, and the assembled clergy watched in solemn awe as the broken body of the high priest was restored by divine decree. Furious at Dante's audacity, the supreme commander of the Knights Credo wasted no time in dispatching his finest hunter, Nero. Tracking Dante through the city's labyrinth of rooftops and back alleys, Nero closed in, only to be thwarted by Ethan. With deft precision, Ethan sabotaged a critical bridge, forcing Nero to detour and costing him precious minutes. By the time Nero reached the basilica courtyard, the final gunshots had already echoed through its ancient stones. Panting, he raised his weapon, too late to save Sanctus, or perhaps too late to stop Dante from vanishing once more into the night. Ethan watched in stunned silence as Dante laid waste to the Pope and the demon-tainted knights of the Order of the Demonic Sword. Dante intended to slip away afterward, but just then, Nero arrived. He took in the slaughter at a single furious glance, snatched up Apophis, the very sword Ethan had tossed him in haste, and refused to let it go. In that instant, the long dormant blade sprang to life. It drank in Nero's wrath and flared into a blood-red radiance so fierce it stole the breath. That crimson light cut through darkness like a meteor streaking across the sky, yet it carried a deathly shadow. It wasn't just light, but an embodiment of bone-chilling cold, sharp enough to freeze the blood of the strongest warrior. Under its glow, space itself seemed to warp, time slowed to a crawl, and a suffocating dread settled over the scene. Against that hellish red backdrop, Apophis looked more ferocious than ever, its jagged edge promising a lesson no one present would soon forget. Ethan stared at the blade in awe. Apophis looked as if it had been forged from the condensed blood and life essence of hundreds of millions. Deep grooves rippled along its length, each one a silent chronicle of slaughter and wailing souls. An oppressive, heart-stopping aura pulsed from the steel, a living threat to every heartbeat, every breath. As Ethan held the sword aloft, space itself seemed to buckle beneath its power. Reality warped around the weapon's edge, as though the very laws of nature recoiled in terror at its presence. Even the faint, ghostly glow dancing along the tip sent shivers racing through his veins. It was more than a visual spectacle. It was an assault on mind and spirit, a whispered promise of death. Dante, watching from the shadows, could only stare in disbelief. Even a veteran warrior like him, well-versed in the legends of ancient relics, had never encountered anything that radiated such raw, disorienting force. He swallowed hard, voice barely more than a whisper. This is unimaginable power. Though Ethan's grip trembled, his resolve hardened. With Apophis in hand, he was no longer merely a man, he was the living embodiment of fear itself, and the world would never be the same. Chapter X. The Clash of Swords. The battlefield thrummed with an unsettling energy, as if the abyss itself reached out to whisper to every heart's darkest desires. Then, with a thunderous clang, two blades met in midair, the great sword of rebellion against the rune blade Apophis. Sparks erupted like shooting stars, briefly illuminating the war-torn field as shockwaves rippled through the ground, kicking up clouds of dust and tearing the wind apart. Amid the chaos, Ethan spotted Geely struggling against two enemy mercenaries. In that instant, the roar of battle faded from his mind, replaced by a fierce determination to protect her. He darted forward, using his broad frame as a living shield. "Ethan!" Geely cried, relief and trust flooding her voice as she pressed herself against his side. She knew that no matter how dire the threat, Ethan would stand between her and any danger. Reeling from the impact, Dante staggered back a few paces, his sword of rebellion quivering in his grasp. He leveled a steady stare at the blade Apophis in Ethan's hand, the runes along its edge pulsing with an eerie glow. "There's something off about that sword," he muttered. He glanced from Apophis back to Ethan, suspicion flickering in his eyes as the battlefield raged on around them. Ethan felt the weight of Apophis in his hand, its power crackling through his veins, and for a moment he lost himself in that dark thrill. From where he stood, Dante watched him with a mixture of fascination and fear. Ethan's calm face, so handsome and sincere, made Dante's heart ache until that cruel magic blade whispered its poisonous lies, twisting Dante's thoughts and almost driving him to strike Ethan down. But amid the chaos, Credo kept his head. He knew the real battle wasn't decided in this instant. It was won through foresight and careful planning. Protecting the Pope and Digilia took priority. He tapped Ethan firmly on the shoulder. "I'm counting on you," Credo said. "Get Gilia to safety. I'll handle the rest." Ethan nodded and didn't bother to reply. He'd never wielded a sword like Apophis before. The surge of power was intoxicating, but more than that, it was terrifying. This young warrior had been chosen for a reason, and now he must prove himself. Credo stepped back. "Be careful with that blade, kid." As Credo led the others away, Dante's voice drifted back through the corridor. "You should be the one watching your back." Ethan didn't flinch. He raised Apophis so its runes glowed in the dim light. "Why would I worry about my father's sword?" he asked, voice steady. In that moment, Ethan realized the true danger wouldn't come from without, but from the darkness hidden within the blade itself, and the part of himself it might awaken. Ethan gripped the enchanted sword Apophis in his left hand. He wasn't naturally left-handed, but ever since his right arm had been corrupted by demonic power, it felt foreign and clumsy. He refused to rely on it. Dante watched him with amusement. He didn't mind indulging the boy's bravado. After all, it gave him a chance to probe that strange, fleeting warmth Ethan sometimes radiated, as though some hidden bond flickered between them. Around their feet, the tension of war crackled in the air, poised on the brink of all-out conflict. Ethan had been forged by fate since childhood. Born with Spartan blood coursing through his veins, he had survived in a world of monsters and magic only by awakening the raw, savage strength of his lineage. Yet compared to Dante's practiced grace, battle-scarred technique refined over countless campaigns, Ethan's style was still a wild, untamed dance, unpredictable in its ferocity. A roar tore from Ethan's chest as the blade of Apophis flared to life in his grasp. Radiant energy crackled along the sword's edge, and in a single fluid motion, he leveled it at Dante, determination burning in his eyes. Here, he intended to cut down every barrier between them and emerge victorious. Dante offered a faint, knowing smile, part respect for the younger generation, part eager anticipation of the fight to come. He lifted his legendary sword, Rebellion, and drew a graceful arc through the air, intercepting Nero's blade with perfect timing. The first clash was more than steel against steel. It was a collision of two warriors' wills. Dante felt the raw, vibrant energy behind Nero's strike, youthful power in its purest form, which echoed memories of his own younger days. But the seasoned veteran understood that brute strength alone wouldn't carry the day. With effortless grace, he redirected Nero's force, dissipating the blow and turning his momentum against him. Rebellion dipped, avoiding a direct parry, then swung back in a fluid motion. Instead of slicing with the edge, Dante struck Nero with the flat of his blade, a deliberate, controlled blow that sent the younger fighter stumbling. It was a mark of respect for Nero's strength and a clear lesson in the art of battle. Technique can triumph over raw power. Chapter 854, Iron-Headed Nero. Nero had never imagined Dante could be so overwhelmingly powerful. In the blink of an eye, Dante's sword swept back, its flat edge striking Nero squarely in the chest. Nero's massive form smashed through one crumbling wall, rebounded into a second, then ricocheted off the ceiling before finally crashing to the ground in a cloud of dust and debris. The chamber trembled with each impact, cracks spiderwebbing across ruined stone. Ethan watched the carnage in stunned silence. His own uncle was remorseless, though neither Dante nor Nero knew they were related. Dante sheathed his sword and tilted his head, feigning concern. "Whoa, sorry about that? You all right, kid?" His voice was light, almost playful, but the smile he wore was a razor's edge. A chill ran down Nero's spine as he felt a dark swell of demonic power radiate from Dante. Pain throbbed through Nero's ribs, but the surge of energy burning in his veins drowned it out. Nero struggled to his feet, gasping. He realized that head-on strength alone would never topple an opponent like Dante. He needed speed, flexibility, cunning. As Nero's resolve hardened, Dante's grin widened. He sensed the shift in Nero's stance, a spark of strategy amid the pain, and decided to press his advantage. Dante moved first. With lithe, predatory grace, he darted in, testing Nero's defenses, searching for an opening. The duel was about to enter a far deadlier phase, and neither combatant would yield without a fight. Nero's behavior had Dante on edge. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously amiss. Then again, he hadn't once considered Virgil in all of this. His brother was so notoriously aloof that Dante would never have imagined Virgil fathering a child with anyone. Don't underestimate me," Nero snarled, anger and defiance ringing in his low voice. He sprang to his feet, every muscle coiling like a predator ready to strike. In his hand, the magic sword Apophis began to hum, its dark steel resonating with his will and spitting out waves of raw, violent energy. The razor-sharp tip glowed with a menacing light, as if it could rip through any obstacle in its path. A playful smile tugged at Dante's lips. He admired Nero's fierce determination, and deep down, he felt a flicker of something else, a cautious respect. Each battle against a powerful opponent was a test of his own limits, and this young warrior before him clearly had the potential to become one of Dante's greatest challenges. "Oh?" Dante's tone was light, teasing, but his eyes shone with genuine interest. The real contest was just beginning. "It seems you don't intend to give up easily, kid," Dante murmured in that low, magnetic tone of his, every word a perfectly tuned note that sent ripples through the air. "But courage alone won't carry you. You must learn to wield your power more effectively." He drew himself up, eyes narrowing. "Show me what you're really capable of." Ethan snarled and summoned every ounce of strength into a single, devastating strike. His magic sword Apophis ignited in a brilliant arc of energy as he drove it toward Dante. But Dante stood his ground, unhurried and unfazed. Rebellion, his own legendary blade, felt like an extension of his arm as he met Apophis head-on. With a deft flick, he deflected the blow, caught the magic sword's hilt, and traced a precise half-circle release that siphoned away its power. In the blink of an eye, Ethan whipped out the blue rose in his right hand and fired 2 shots in rapid succession. Bang! Bang! The first round punched a hole through armor like it was paper. The second seared at the very essence of demons. Dante, a veteran of countless battles, immediately recognized the gun's modifications and couldn't help but let a flash of approval cross his eyes. He hadn't expected Ethan to react so quickly and accurately, but Dante was no stranger to agile opponents. A faint crease appeared between Dante's brows as he lifted his sword, then a cynical smile curved his lips. With a single fluid motion, he deflected Ethan's stray, Ike, and swung his blade like an invisible shield, catching 2 bullets on the steel's edge. Even more impressive, he adjusted the blade's angle just so, sending the rounds careening off course and smashing into the stone pillar beside them with 2 deafening clangs. That display of swordsmanship, battlefield control, and uncanny anticipation left no doubt who held the upper hand. Dante gave an approving chuckle. Not bad, entertaining, but still not enough. His tone was light, almost encouraging, but the challenge was clear. Ethan's heart pounded at the ease with which Dante dominated the fight, yet he refused to back down. Drawing on the Blue Rose's supple power, he reshaped his tactics on the fly, alternating rapid-fire shots from range with explosive, up-close strikes, determined to break through Dante's defenses. The staccato bark of Blue Rose's gunfire blended with the ringing clash of Apophis's blade, weaving a frenetic dance of steel and lead. Nero pressed his fierce assault without pause, but Dante didn't flinch. If anything, his smile widened. He'd been waiting for an opponent like Nero, someone who could resurrect the fighting fire he'd nearly lost. With measured calm, Dante reached behind him and drew his twin pistols, ebony and ivory. These custom weapons were famed for their blistering rate of fire and raw stopping power, yet what truly set them apart was the bond they shared with Dante's mind. In his hands, they moved as naturally as his own limbs. Poised like 2 sleek cheetahs, they prowled in perfect harmony with Apophis's rebellious edge, together casting an unbreakable web of lethal precision. The conflict escalated to its zenith. Bullets tore through the air, shattering against Nero's blasts in showers of sparks, while swordlight fractured into dazzling rays. Every exchange between Dante and Nero felt like 2 supernovae colliding, bright, explosive, and utterly relentless. And through it all, Dante's voice rang out, taunting and untamed, fueling the fury of their epic duel. Ethan's eyes narrowed as Dante jabbed and jeered, trying to throw him off balance with every quip. Dante grinned, swing after swing. "I'm gonna hit your head, your hands, your feet." Each taunt cut sharper than any blade, and Ethan felt the pressure mounting. He searched desperately for an opening in Dante's relentless onslaught, but the blows came in a perfect, suffocating rhythm. "Shut up!" Ethan roared, unleashing a forceful strike that forced Dante back a step. He had never encountered anyone so impossibly loquacious in the heat of battle. Yet Dante kept up the chatter, almost daring Ethan to lose his cool. Something inside Ethan snapped. Fatigue and fear were swept away, replaced by a single, blazing resolve. He drew in a deep, steady breath, centered himself, and let the noise fade into white noise. Then, with measured precision, he counterattacked. The clash of their styles, Dante's flashy whirlwind defense against Ethan's focused surgical strikes, created a spectacle that left onlookers breathless. Each man pushed the other to the limit, their duel a masterclass in speed, strength, and unbreakable will. Blue Rose's shots cracked through the air, crisp and swift like thunder rolling across a summer sky, relentlessly hammering at Dante's defenses. At the same time, Apophis, Dante's enchanted sword, cleaved the air with mountain-shaking force, each arc probing for a weakness in his guard. Unfazed, Dante simply drew his signature twin pistols, ebony and ivory, feeling them almost pulsing with life in his hands. Every shot wove a deadly lattice of steel and lead, neatly unraveling Nero's onslaught with surgical precision. Chapter 855, The Son of Sparta Kills the Pope. At last, their fierce clash came to an abrupt halt. Dante and Nero simultaneously withdrew their weapons, each sizing up the other with a mix of grudging respect and relentless competitive fire. The cavern around them fell silent, but for their ragged breathing. Dante was the first to speak. His voice rang out, surprisingly light. "Not bad, kid. You're stronger than I gave you credit for." Nero wiped sweat from his brow and managed a cocky grin. "I'm not beaten yet. Let's go again." Dante shook his head and offered a polite shrug. "Sorry, but that's enough for today." He shifted his weight, eyes flicking to the fractured ceiling above. With a single powerful leap, he slammed through the stone roof and disappeared into the night sky. "Until next time." His mocking laughter echoed down into the pit. Nero squeezed the trigger of his blue rose pistol. Nothing happened. Every mana-infused bullet had discharged in the duel. He let out a frustrated sigh and stared up at the gaping hole. "How was that?" he muttered to himself. A calm voice answered from the shadows. "Impressive opponent, wasn't he?" Nero spun around. Relief washed over him when he saw Ethan stepping forward, his face lit by the soft glow of residual mana. "Ethan, you gave me a scare." Ethan offered a wry smile. "I came as soon as I heard gunfire. So, how do you feel?" Nero ran a hand through his sweat-drenched hair. "He's on another level. Dante moves like a hurricane. Every strike precise, every dodge perfect. My blue rose ran dry before I could land anything decisive. Even if I'd fought him all day, I doubt I'd have drawn blood." Ethan nodded thoughtfully, eyes narrowing as he replayed the battle in his mind. "Then we learn. Next time, he won't walk away unscathed." Silence settled between them as they prepared to regroup. The night air was still, but both men knew it wouldn't be long before Dante returned, and the real fight began. Ethan's eyes narrowed as he surveyed the scene. It was too stark to ignore. "His name is Dante Sparta," he said quietly, "the son of Sparta himself, the figure this island practically worships." Nero's breath caught. Dante? The heir of Sparta? And yet he'd just slain half a dozen knights. Why him? What's he doing here? "Look at the bodies," Ethan prompted. Nero followed Ethan's outstretched arm to the scattered corpses of the Demon Sword Order. The fallen knights lay twisted, their forms already shifting into grotesque demon hybrids. When did this happen?" he stammered. His eyes widened as realization dawned. "There's something seriously wrong with the Order." Ethan nodded. "They must have been concealing something, some forbidden ritual or dark alliance, and Dante discovered it. He's a demon hunter above all else. If he saw a trace of true demonic corruption, he'd strike without hesitation." Nero shook his head, disbelief mixing with anger. "But Credo wouldn't allow this. He's too righteous." "I'm not trusting anyone until I know the truth," Nero countered. "I'm not leaving this place until I find out exactly what the Demon Sword Order has been hiding." Ethan folded his arms and gave a slow nod, acceptance, if not approval, in his eyes. "Very well, but be careful. Dante doesn't make mistakes." Before Nero could reply, Geli appeared at the archway, carrying a long, lacquered case. He looked from Nero to Ethan, the boxed object clutched tightly in his hands. "You two," he said softly, "you need to see this." Ethan's boots crunched against the rubble as he scanned the ruins. Then he heard a voice calling his name. "Nero!" Geli let out a relieved breath when she saw Nero emerge unscathed from the cloud of dust. She caught his eye and nodded reassuringly. Nero covered the last few paces in a sprint and reached out to take the long case Geli was holding. "My weapon?" he asked. Geli lifted the lid. Inside lay the Crimson Queen, Nero's favorite, its ruby-hued blade gleaming even in the dim light. Nero's face lit up with a genuine smile. He ran a fingertip along the guard. I was going to return the demon sword Apophis to Ethan," Nero admitted, glancing back over his shoulder. "He'll need it to investigate what's gone wrong with the Order of the Demon Sword." But when he turned to where Ethan had been standing, the young man was gone. Nero frowned in confusion and a trace of worry. Geli caught his look. "The enemies have withdrawn," she said quietly, still keeping watch on their surroundings. Nero nodded, tucking the Crimson Queen's case under his arm. He already knew that Dante's recent betrayal wasn't entirely his fault. Something deeper had poisoned the Order's ranks. He decided to report everything to Credo. Perhaps Credo could uncover the Order's corruption. As Nero made his way toward the cathedral, word of the skirmish prompted Credo into action. He oversaw the rites of resurrection for the fallen pope, invoking the ancient death ceremony with grim determination. From the sidelines, Agnes, the Order's chief scientific researcher, watched him with thinly veiled contempt. Credo ignored the glare. With Dante's name cleared and the Pope's revival underway, Nero hoped their next move would finally expose the rot within the Demon Sword Order and put things right once and for all. Ethan sat unmoved by Agnes's scolding, his attention fixed instead on Nero's earlier revelation. Someone in the Demon Sword Order might be conducting forbidden demonic experiments. The idea alone had sent a chill through him. Now, as he surveyed the clearing, he noticed the sword at Nero's side, a long, dark blade etched with glowing runes. "What's the story with that sword?" Ethan asked, nodding toward the weapon. Nero gave the blade a casual tap. "This is Apophis, a magic sword of considerable power. I received it from a friend." He stopped short of saying more, certainly nothing about his father. Ethan leaned forward, curiosity warring with caution. Apophis was no ordinary blade. Its very aura seemed to hum with arcane energy. For a moment, Ethan wondered whether the sword could summon demons, but he dismissed the thought. He and Nero had been through too much together, blood brothers, really, and his feelings for July were just as deep. They were all family in a sense, and Ethan would never suspect Nero of wrongdoing. "A friend?" Ethan prompted softly, his brow furrowed. "Who?" Nero's gaze drifted away, as if weighing how much to reveal. Ethan knew his friend well, fierce, stubborn, but unerringly loyal. In his heart, Ethan hoped Nero's friend was someone he could trust. If anyone could help Nero hide dangerous secrets or keep him out of harm's way, it would be Ethan himself. "How is the Pope?" Credo asked, watching Nero's reaction. Nero's gaze flickered away, and he shifted uncomfortably. Clearly, he did not want to discuss it. "He's all right, just a few injuries, nothing life-threatening." Credo closed his mouth and bobbed his head once. "Be mindful of what you say, Nero." Nero drew in a steadying breath. "Understood. I'll look into it thoroughly." Credo hesitated. Before Nero joined the order, Credo himself had undergone the return ceremony and learned to transform into a being of light, though in truth, his so-called angelic form was closer to a holy demon. When Nero arrived, Credo had personally trained him in swordsmanship, recognizing his raw talent. He had planned to promote the young warrior, but had been frustrated by Nero's stubborn independence and tendency to flout orders. There had even been talk of putting him through the rite of death, but Credo never suspected Nero carried demonic power of his own. Now that Nero's secret was exposed, Credo had no choice but to assign him a dangerous mission: track down Dante. When Nero learned that Dante was reputedly the son of Sparta, he did not hold back. "How do you know that?" Credo's voice tightened. At that moment, Credo realized something deeper was unfolding, one that threatened to tear the order apart from within. Chapter 7. The Man in Red. Ethan paused at the edge of the meeting chamber, uncertain what to say. Nero glanced up from the council table, his expression guarded. Finally, he spoke in a low voice. "The source is a friend of mine. He swears he saw the entire incident." Ethan folded his arms, studying Nero carefully. "So far, all we have are fragments," he said. "We don't know what really happened. We can't base our judgment on one side of the story. For now, our priority must be tracking down the Man in Red." Nero nodded, relief flickering across his face. "Exactly. Once we've located him, we can compel him to speak." Ethan gave a curt nod, but inwardly he was frustrated. Who was this mysterious friend? Why not reveal him? He decided to keep his own counsel for the moment. "Very well," he replied. "I'll assemble a search party." As Nero turned back to his documents, Ethan slipped outside into the corridor. He needed answers, and he needed them fast. The real key to clearing Credo's name was Dante. If Dante could be persuaded to return and testify, the entire misunderstanding would collapse. After all, Credo was Spartan-born and held in high regard by the Demon Sword Order. A statement from Dante would carry weight. Ethan leaned against the cool stone wall and let his thoughts drift to his father, the Archon of the Order. He suspected a deeper investigation was underway, one his father had quietly initiated. But details were scarce. For now, Ethan had two tasks: find the Man in Red and bring Dante home before Credo was dragged into a trial he couldn't win. Only then could the truth emerge, and only then could the real culprits be exposed. Chapter 856, The True Genius of the Devil May Cry World. Beneath the surface of the world, hidden in a labyrinth of reinforced concrete and steel, lay the Sword Cult's secret laboratory, a place so deep and obscure that time itself seemed to slow and throb with oppressive intent. Here, knowledge and taboo entwined, forming an abyss from which few dared return. This was Ethan's domain, the head of the cult's technical department, where he chased the ultimate, most deranged of dreams. Ethan stood alone at his central workstation, dwarfed by racks of humming machines, crystalline data arrays, and arcane instruments whose purpose no outsider could guess. The faint, clinical glow of countless monitors cast sharp shadows across his gaunt frame. His eyes, magnified by a single brass-rimmed monocle, gleamed with a feverish intensity, an almost unhealthy hunger to peer beyond the veil of reality. To him, conventional science was merely a starting point. He hungered for truths others feared to name. But brilliance and obsession did little to soften the sting of failure. Another experiment had collapsed in ruin, a cascade of shattered glass and scrambled readings. Ethan's hands, slender, deft, but trembling, slapped the laboratory table as though it were to blame. "Damn it!" he roared into the silent chamber, a sound that shook loose dust from the ceiling panels. In that moment, the light in his eyes flickered with frustration. Yet beneath the surface lay an unbreakable resolve. Failure was nothing more than a stepping stone to triumph, and Ethan would not rest until he had bent the very laws of nature to his will. "Failed again!" Ethan snarled, his voice low and tight with anger, each word forced through clenched teeth. The smoke from the recent blast still clung to the air, a choking blend of sulfur, scorching ozone, and long-settled chemical fumes, tainted further by the fetid stench of demon remains and the icy tang of unknown metals. Even the laboratory's state-of-the-art ventilation system fought in vain against this oppressive haze. Ethan swept his gaze across the room. Overhead, a vast steel framework crisscrossed the ceiling, bristling with experimental apparatus. Some pulsed with a faint blue glow, while others lay dormant, waiting for activation. Against one wall stood a weapons rack, displaying the cult's signature razor-edged swords alongside bizarre techno-magical contraptions. Some were as fine and deadly as thorns, others were as massive and unyielding as boulders. Each artifact radiated raw power and untold danger. What caught Ethan's eye most were the scattered demon corpses, each one more unsettling than the last. Some lay whole, others were little more than fragmented husks. A few had shriveled into mummified relics, while others still clung to the grotesque vitality they'd worn in life, as if poised to spring up and tear intruders apart at any moment. To Agnes, however, these horrors were priceless. Each drop of blood, every shard of bone, even the whispers of a soul, held the promise of unlocking unimaginable power. He was convinced that by deciphering their dark secrets, he could bend reality itself to his will. Yet that very obsession bound him in an endless cycle of hope and frustration. Every failed experiment was a stark reminder of how far he stood from the pinnacle he sought. Still, he never wavered. Even in his bleakest hours, an unquenchable flame raged in his chest. Around him, the chamber walls were a riot of arcane diagrams and scientific schematics. From age-old alchemical sigils to cutting-edge genetic blueprints, each stroke of ink a testament to Agnes's insatiable appetite for knowledge and his relentless drive to conquer the unknown. Test tubes, vials of reagents, and shattered mechanical components lay scattered across the workbench, mute witnesses to Agnes's countless trials and failures. He sank onto a nearby stool, eyes locked on the twisted remains of his latest man-made demon. Once he had placed all his hopes in this creation, now it lay in ruins. "Why? Why is this happening?" he whispered, ice echoing through the vacant lab. Each experiment had drawn on every ounce of his expertise and ingenuity. He'd been driven by a single goal, to unlock the Spartan demon bloodline and forge its power for himself. Yet again, reality had delivered a crushing defeat. That unattainable prize felt more like a curse. He pressed his palms against his temples, head spinning with doubt, until a cool, measured voice cut through his turmoil. "Because it's too crude." The words were like frost on bare skin, and Agnes snapped to attention. He spun around and found a man standing at the doorway, casually leaning against the frame. Dressed in a crisp white windbreaker, arms folded, the newcomer's pale eyes were sharp with detached curiosity. It was Ethan. Agnes's fury ignited. He couldn't bear anyone diminishing his hard-won achievements. With a deafening roar, he snatched up the lone sword demon prototype from the table and swung it with all his strength. But instead of striking his intended target, The model slammed into the invisible barrier around Ethan. In an instant, the barrier cracked and exploded, sending shards flying, and the violent backlash crushed Agnes's arm in one brutal strike. "Ah!" he howled, collapsing to his knees as searing pain threatened to overwhelm him. Ever the coward at heart, he clamped his good hand over the shattered limb, blood oozing through his fingers and dripping onto the floor in a dark, spreading pool. In that agonizing moment, he finally understood just how unbridgeable the gap between his talents and Ethan's truly was. Ethan lowered his gaze to the broken figurine at his feet, his tone calm and impressed. "Agnes, your work is extraordinary. You've seamlessly fused alchemy, genetic engineering, and biotechnology to create living artificial demons, true marvels of this world." Indeed, despite the devastation before him, Agnes remained one of the brightest prodigies in the Devil May Cry realm, his genius undeniable, even in defeat. In the Devil May Cry universe, demons are uniquely mutable. Through alchemy and advanced biotechnologies, they can be transformed or even synthesized from scratch. But their deep, mysterious natures often shift without warning, turning each experiment into a gamble. No one understood that better than Agnes, a world-renowned master of mysticism, alchemy, and scientific biotech. His singular obsession was the Spartan demon bloodline, and after years of study, he was no closer to deciphering its secret. Several seasons ago, agents of the magic sword cult had discovered discarded fragments of Virgil's transformed Dark Angel form, along with shattered pieces of the Yamato blade, washed ashore on a remote beach. Agnes seized the materials and threw every ounce of his expertise into reverse engineering them. He pored over ancient grimoires, ran countless genetic assays, and tested prototype demon constructs. Yet each attempt ended in failure. Demons and their artificial proxies proved frustratingly imperfect. Today, Agnes sat hunched over his work table, the scattered shards of Yamato and tattered angel feathers spread before him like a grim puzzle. Across the room, Ethan watched him with cool detachment. "As I told you," Ethan said softly, "your methods are too crude. You're overlooking the very essence of life." Agnes sprang up, eyes blazing. "The essence of life? What on earth are you talking about?" His voice cracked with equal parts anger and bewilderment. "I've mastered every facet of alchemy and biotech, yet you claim I've missed something fundamental." Ethan folded his arms. "The Spartan demon bloodline isn't just a sequence of genes you can splice in a petri dish. It's the embodiment of a primordial will, a soul force that binds every facet of its being. You can tinker with cells and strands of DNA all you like, but unless you account for that living will, your creations will never truly hold demonic power." Agnes stared at him, speechless for the first time in years. The shards of Yamato and the Dark Angel feathers lay inert on the table, as though waiting for him to discover what science alone could not reveal. You're trying to dissect and replicate it with purely scientific methods, all the while overlooking the emotions, desires, and choices that give this power its meaning. That's like trying to fish in a tree. Chapter 857, Galactic Empire Recruitment. Agnes stood motionless, stunned. He'd never considered his research from this angle. So long, he'd immersed himself in the realm of technology, confident that reason could conquer every challenge, never pausing to acknowledge the complexity and depth of life itself. "Who are you?" he managed at last. "Just a passing witcher," the stranger replied coolly. Ethan, or as he would now introduce himself, strode toward the hovering display cabinet with deliberate steps. His gaze never wavered from the shattered blade inside, the fabled Yama sword. Legend held that this weapon could slice through all matter and rend open the gates of hell. Its mere existence embodied the ultimate fusion of power and taboo. "This sword belonged to Virgil, the dark knight ensnared by fate," Ethan said, his voice low and magnetic, as though recounting an ancient tragedy. He hungered for power above all else, and in the end, power consumed him. When he fell, the Yama sword fell with him. Agnes felt a surge of conflicting emotions, wonder, regret, even sorrow. He realized in that moment how narrowly he'd viewed the universe through the lens of machines and equations. Here was proof that some forces lay far beyond the reach of logic. Ethan reached out, fingertips brushing the glass. "I came to claim what's mine," he said quietly, "and to awaken the empire that awaits its true sovereign." With those words hanging in the air, the two men faced a crossroads. one of science, one of sorcery, and one that would reshape the fate of the Galactic Empire itself. Ethan had long been fascinated by Virgil's legend, even going so far as to try, and so far fail, to replicate or surpass that power through sheer scientific ingenuity. But now, standing before the shattered hilt of the Yan demon sword, he felt the limits of technology more keenly than ever. "I've studied it endlessly," Agnes admitted at last, his voice ragged with fatigue. "No matter what methods I employ, I can't seal these fractures, much less rouse the blade's dormant might. It's bound by some deeper curse. Of all the legendary weapons in the Devil May Cry world, even the formidable Spartan sword, which grants its wielder the power of Sparta, none held Ethan's rapt attention like the Yan demon sword. He'd admired Pandora's beauty too, but the Yan demon's sinister elegance spoke to him on another level. Slowly, reverently, Ethan extended his hand. His fingertips brushed the cold, ancient metal of the sword's handle, and in that instant, the world seemed to pause. Agnes's explanation cut off mid-sentence as if an unseen force had severed it. Ethan's eyes flared with a fierce, unearthly light, and a surge of awe washed over him, an overwhelming shock that no laboratory experiment could ever hope to explain. The centuries-old legend of the Yama sword, a magic blade said to cut through every boundary, began here, broken into two pieces and lost to time. Now awakened by an unseen force within Ethan, its power stirred once more. The shattered halves rose into the air, each slow rotation traced by faint currents of magic, so subtle they eluded naked eyes. Those currents wove themselves into a complex lattice, drawing the fragments inexorably together. As moments passed, the weaving magic intensified, until, before the astonished crowd, the two pieces slipped back into place. In one seamless motion, the sword was restored, its blade gleaming and whole, as if it had never known fracture. The sight defied every law of physics and challenged the very fabric of reality. How is this possible?" breathed Agnes, his voice trembling. He scoured his mind for any scientific theory that could explain what he just witnessed, but every explanation fell impossibly short. Agnes had seen it all, decades of groundbreaking experiments, miracle cures, even the rarest of bioweapons. Yet never before had he been so utterly stunned. He stared at the young man before him and finally found his voice. Could it be Spartan blood? His tone was tense with speculation. If Ethan really were descended from the legendary Spartans, it might explain the impossible things he'd just witnessed. But Ethan only shook his head, calm and unflappable. "No," he said firmly, "that's not it. My power simply overwhelms this blade. I'm the reason it can heal." Agnes drew in a slow breath, puzzlement etched deep on his face. People with that kind of raw, regenerative force were almost unheard of, and here was one sitting in his lab. He leaned forward, eyes narrowed, searching for the truth in Ethan's impassive gaze. Ethan held up a hand. "Go on," he said, voice light. "Test me with that knife." Agnes hesitated for only a moment before grasping the scalpel. But just as he raised it, Ethan's expression shifted into something altogether different. Something calculated. "Let me make you an offer," he said, leaning closer. "I can supply you with specimens you've never dreamed of, creatures more powerful and unique than any demon you've studied." The promise lingered in the air, charged with possibility. Agnes looked down at the gleaming blade in his hand, then back at Ethan's steady stare, and felt a swirl of conflicting emotions settle in his chest. Curious, greed, and something darker still. Whatever lay ahead, he knew one thing for certain. His research would never be the same. Ethan's offer was an irresistible temptation. Agnes's goal was straightforward, to forge ever more powerful demon weapons and artificial demons. Though his scientific talents were unquestioned, he'd never secured the resources or backing to make a true breakthrough. As he'd admitted himself, "Your artificial demon is impressive, but in the grand scheme it's still only a mid to low level creation." Ethan met his gaze steadily. "With my help, we can go far beyond that. Together, we'll build something that will shake the world." Agnes fell silent. He knew Ethan wasn't making empty boasts. He thought back to his past successes. The blade, the scale blade, the hellhound, the silver knight. Each one had demonstrated astonishing power, yet against genuinely formidable foes, they'd proved almost irrelevant. In the original timeline, for example, Nero awakened the Spartan bloodline, and despite having only a quarter-pure lineage, dismantled those engineered demons without breaking a sweat. What Ethan was promising, however, was an entirely different league of power, an achievement Agnes had long dreamed of but never believed possible. And now, standing before him, was the key to making that dream a reality. "What exactly is this powerful and special material you speak of?" Agnes asked, his voice low and cautious. He needed specifics before he could judge the proposal's risks and rewards. Ethan's lips curved into a confident half-smile. "These are no ordinary demons. They exist beyond the standard classifications, creatures with intricate structures, immense power, even the potential to challenge the fundamental laws of our universe." The promise and the mystery were intoxicating. Agnes drew in a shaky breath. "Then I am yours to command, Master." He joined Pope Saintis for demon specimens and access to an undisturbed laboratory the size of an island. But Ethan's true leverage was far greater. Raw, unfathomable power, and a material so extraordinary that Agnes had never laid eyes on it. And he knew refusal wasn't an option. Denying Ethan now would mean certain death. Chapter 858. Firebull Belial. Agnes had no choice but to obey. He bowed his head. "Master, what are your orders?" "Keep things running as usual," Ethan said, "but don't get involved in anything to do with the Demon Sword Order." "Understood." Agnes's eyes flickered with determination. He was nothing more than an undercover agent here. Ethan reached into his cloak and produced a small vial. "Here, take a look, see if there's anything interesting." Agnes accepted the vial and carefully removed the stopper. "What?" He raised his custom-made monocle to his eye, an ingenious little device that combined precise focus, microscopic magnification, and even energy spectrum vision. As he peered inside, his expression brightened. "These are anomalous cells," he announced. "They awaken a subject's dormant potential and transform him into a monster. Depending on the specimen, strength can increase anywhere from 2-fold to 100 times. Ethan watched quietly. He already possessed an unparalleled understanding of these monster cells. At his command, their hidden properties were plain to him. Yet even his near-omniscient insight felt narrow when measured against the unfathomable heights of true omnipotence. He wondered how far these cells' power could reach, and what terrifying creatures they might one day unleash. Agnes's eyes glittered with anticipation. "Master, I must study how this cell affects demons," he said eagerly. He could barely wait to begin the experiment. Meanwhile, Ethan slipped away without drawing attention. Nero pressed on Dante's trail, and at last discovered that Dante had already slipped into the Castle of Destiny. Perched atop the island's northern snow peak, the Castle of Destiny was famed as the former seat of Sparta, and now served as the residence of the successive pontiffs of the Magic Sword Order. The castle's sprawling complex combined grandeur with a hint of the macabre. Two vast halls opened onto a series of smaller chambers, among them a relic of Sparta's rule that once served as a torture chamber, while beyond lay a central courtyard and even a small cemetery. In the east wing stood the Grand Master's bedroom, said to be the very room Sparta had once occupied. To the west, the headquarters of the demonic sword order was hidden behind a cascading waterfall that masked a secret forest passage. Yet the castle's greatest secret lay beneath its stone floors, a network of hidden laboratories that formed Agnes's true territory. Nero, following Dante's faint tracks through icy corridors and shadowed galleries, finally reached the lab's concealed entrance. Just then, Ethan appeared again at his side. "Ethan!" Nero exclaimed, relief and excitement mingling in his voice. Ethan met his friend's gaze. Together, they prepared to push deeper into the heart of the Castle of Destiny and closer to Dante's still unseen motives. Ethan burst into Nero's study, his expression grave. "Nero, I've traced the recent demon activity straight back to the Demon Sword Order." Nero looked up, alarm in his eyes. "The Demon Sword Order? What are they up to?" Ethan spread a set of darkened parchments across the desk. "They secured a trove of arcane relics and used their combined power to open a small portal to hell. Their goal is to capture demons and siphon off their strength." Nero's face paled as the pieces fell into place. "That explains why demon sightings have exploded recently." "Exactly," Ethan said. "We've got to evacuate everyone on the island immediately. I'll stay behind to seal the gate and deal with any demons that remain." Nero's jaw tightened. "I'm coming with you. You can't face that alone." Ethan gave him a firm, confident look. I've navigated the demon realm countless times. A few stranded demons won't stop me. He laid a steady hand on Nero's shoulder. After a moment's hesitation, Nero nodded. All right, but promise me you'll be careful, Ethan. I promise, Ethan replied. Now go. Warn the people. I'll take care of the rest. As Nero hurried out to sound the alarm, Ethan drew his sword, steeled himself, and stepped toward the looming portal. The fate of the island, and perhaps the world, rested on what came next. Ethan had planned to shepherd Julie and the others through the gates and then circle back to assist Dante. To his surprise, Dante already held the line. All Ethan needed to do was complete the formal check-in rites required for entering the Holy Land. That's when he came face to face with the Firebull, the very demon Dante had just driven off. This monstrous creature was none other than Belial, the ancient demon king of Hell in Jewish legend, ruler of the Valley of Fire, and commander of legions of the dead and infernal spirits. After a brief exile in the demon realm to rebuild his strength, Belial had once more breached the barrier into the human world. He was far from fully recovered, but the memory of his earlier humiliation burned hotter than any wound. He had been defeated by a man not even as tall as his calf. Consumed by rage and thirsting for revenge, Belial returned before his wounds had properly healed, only to find that his victorious foe had vanished. Now, standing before these human-forged gates, the demon lord seethed with unanswered questions. Who was the man who dared defeat him? And when would he show himself again? Ethan's presence crackled with demonic energy, but if he were a pure demon, Belial would have sensed it at once. Initially, Belial assumed he was human. Could he be a half-demon, born of demon and mortal? Such hybrids were almost unheard of. The only famous example was the legendary swordsman Sparta, who 2,000 years ago had turned his back on the demon world, fought to save humanity, and even fathered a child with a human woman. To Belial, the very idea was absurd. Why would a mighty demon fall in love with a mere human? Why bring a half-breed into the world at all? In the demon's eyes, humans were little more than prey. Even now, long after the human and demon realms were sundered, most demons, including Belial, still viewed mortals with contempt. He tilted his head back, staring up at the silver moon, and muttered, I just don't understand. Why had Sparta betrayed his own kind? Belial had been nothing but a lowly demon back then, yet even he had heard the rumors. It was said that Sparta's defiance and the blood he spilled against his former comrades was the very reason Demon Emperor Mendes could claim the throne. Without Sparta's sacrifice, the balance of power in the demon realm would have been very different. Now, standing before Ethan, Belial felt those old doubts stir once more. Could this young man, human, demon, or something in between, really possess the same legacy that had fractured their world centuries ago? Belial had never met Sparta, yet he'd long admired the legendary demon lord, secretly vowing that one day he would rise to the same heights. And yet Sparta had betrayed his own kind, slaughtering countless demons, sealing away the demon emperor, and siding with humankind. Why he did it, Belial still couldn't fathom, even after 2,000 years. In Belial's eyes, no other demon could have dared to mate with a human except Sparta. So who, then, was the stranger who had gravely wounded him? Could he be another son of Sparta's? It wasn't impossible. Rumors of Sparta's offspring had swirled through the demon realm for centuries. Though no one could claim to have seen him up close, tales described a young warrior with shining silver hair, clad in blood-red garments, whose skill with the sword rivaled Sparta's, and who also wielded firearms to reseal the resurrected demon emperor. Some even whispered that his power eclipsed that of the demon lord himself. Chapter 859, The Demon of Martial Virtue. Belial halted and stared after the retreating figure. Now that he'd had a good look, it was undeniable. This man matched every description of the legendary son of Sparta, Dante. Rumors had swirled for years about Dante's uncanny appearance, shifting with age whenever human blood ran through his veins. The silver hair, the blood-red robes, the almost alien sword strapped across his back. Everything lined up perfectly with the stories. Could the demon emperor really have been bested by this mortal? Belial released a low sigh. He'd never set eyes on the demon emperor himself. Back when the emperor still ruled, Belial had been nothing more than a lowly demon, unworthy of an audience. He might have gained that status by now, but the Emperor was sealed away in the rift between the demon world and the human realm, forever beyond reach. Idle speculation won't help, Belial muttered to himself. He pushed onward through the diabolical throng. Every demon in this place seemed keyed to madness. According to his scouts, it wasn't demons who tore open the gates of hell this time, but humans. Despicable, Belial spat, contempt souring his voice. He raised his gaze to a massive stone statue hovering in the distant sky, its inscrutable face watching over this infernal domain. Whatever path lay ahead, he would follow it and uncover the truth of Dante, the son of Sparta, and the fate of the sealed emperor. Belial's lieutenants had come with alarming news. Humans had fashioned their own god. They lured demons into this world in the name of worship, only to butcher them afterward. As Belial suspected, mortals were hopelessly foolish. Yet what had driven Sparta to rescue such idiots? He still couldn't fathom his former master's motives. There was no way Belial would lend his power to support such senseless schemes. "You didn't say," a smooth male voice murmured from behind. Belial whipped around but saw nothing. "I'm right here," the voice added. Still empty-handed, Belial sighed in irritation. Finally, he noticed a slim figure perched lightly on the tip of his tail, a man clad in a pristine white trench coat. "You insolent!" Belial lashed out, flicking his tail in anger. In an instant, the intruder reappeared before him, standing casually on the stone floor. "I never imagined Dante would let you slip back into the demon realm so easily," the man said with a wry smile, hands tucked into his coat pockets. Belial's crimson eyes narrowed. The game, it seemed, was just beginning. Ethan's eyes narrowed. "Is it because you haven't killed anyone that you still stand there?" Belial's horns crackled with ember light. Ethan had assumed the Firebull Demon King would have slaughtered every challenger by now, rather than let one defiantly face him. He certainly hadn't expected the demon to show such restraint. The ground trembled as Belial slammed a hoof down, sending sparks skittering over blackened stone. His voice, deep and molten, rumbled through the cavern. "You ask foolish questions, human." As ruler of Fire Hell, Belial despised ambushes or sneaky tactics. He believed in meeting any threat head-on. He fixed Ethan with a burning glare. "Draw your weapon." Ethan offered a wry smile. "How very honorable of you, big guy." With deliberate calm, he unsheathed a blade from across his back. It shimmered with a dark, otherworldly glow. "This is Demon Sword Ethan," he announced, "forged from my own spirit." He raised the weapon so its edge caught the flickering torchlight. "No matter what you wield, no matter how fierce your flame, you can't touch me." A gout of fiery smoke curled from Belial's nostrils. With a roar that shook the cavern walls, he charged, lava-forged sword leveled at Ethan's heart. Most so-called magic weapons are little more than arms forged by demons. A far rarer and far more potent kind bears the very soul of a demon. When a demon's body and spirit are utterly broken before an opponent it truly respects, its essence transforms into a weapon bound to that victor. This change isn't born of the demon's own ambition, but of its complete surrender. In death, its soul becomes the blade or staff it once wielded. Some demons, however, shape weapons through sheer force of will, like Belial, the Firebull, whose enormous greatsword crackles with infernal power. To him, the idea of a human possessing a demon's soul as a weapon should be laughable. How dangerous could a mere mortal be? With a roar that shook the ground, Belial swung his massive sword down at Ethan. The colossus of steel and flame descended in a blazing arc, an attack meant to cleave man and blade alike. Ethan met the blow without hesitation. He raised his own sword, its blade imbued with a demon's restless spirit, and slammed it against Belial's greatsword. The impact detonated in a thunderous boom. Flames and embers swept outward like a volcanic eruption, but at the center of the blast stood Ethan, unmoved. His demon soul sword held firm, immovable as granite. By contrast, Belial's once pristine blade was marred and chipped along its edge. "How is this possible?" Belial bellowed, stepping back as his fiery aura flickered in sudden uncertainty. The Firebull stared in disbelief at the human before him, Ethan's calm eyes reflecting both resolve and the quiet triumph of a true demon's fall. Ethan stood tall, supremely confident in his own strength, until the sight before him stole his breath away. "This can't be happening," he murmured. Across the cavern, Belial the Fire Ox threw back his head and let arcane power course through every inch of his massive frame. Heat shimmered in the air. Runes of flame carved themselves into his hide. With a thunderous bellow, "Whoa!" he erupted in a ring of living fire. Flames roared outward, ready to devour anything in their path. Even if they failed to knock Ethan off his feet, the intense heat would force him to retreat. Only by keeping his distance and relying on his superior physique could he stand any chance of winning this fight. But Ethan did the exact opposite. He didn't flinch. He didn't hesitate. He charged straight into the inferno. Belial blinked in disbelief. "What? How is he not even burned?" he growled. Ethan sprinted through the wall of flame as if it were a gentle breeze. Sparks danced across his cloak, but he emerged completely unscathed. Without pausing for breath, he swept the devil's sword in a single decisive arc. The blade, dark and unassuming until now, erupted with surging black energy. The force of the blow slammed into Belial like a freight train, shattering his fiery aura. "My power, absorbed?" Belial staggered, eyes blazing with fury. "The devil's sword, it devours every attack and returns it tenfold." Ethan's gaze gleamed in the firelight as he advanced, sword poised. "I don't just fight," he said quietly. "I turn your strength against you." Belial roared again, brimstone hot magic flaring around his horns. Sparks flew as blade met flame, and the clash of titans began anew. Ethan's sword drank in both the demon's previous onslaught and the hellfire erupting around them. A moment later, the blade unleashed its pent-up power in a blinding, searing wave. Firebull, Belial's hulking form, disintegrated as if torn apart by an invisible maelstrom. Yet the devil refused to bow. Even fractured and bleeding embers, Belial's eyes burned with unyielding defiance. If he surrendered now, his soul would be bound and turned into a mere tool, just like so many other fallen devils. "I have retreated once. I will never do so again," he roared, his voice rattling the very air. "I, Belial, will never give my soul to you." With a savage cry, the demon stoked the inferno within his broken body. Flames coiled around his battered horns, growing hotter, denser, until the heat itself seemed alive. Ethan stood his ground, sword lowered but ready, his calm resolve an unspoken challenge. Then, in an explosion of compressed fire, Belial launched himself forward, his mangled head crowned in unquenchable flames. This was the devil's final strike, and Ethan braced himself for the impact. Chapter 860, The darkness of the cult flames engulfed Ethan the moment they struck him. "Why? Aren't you dodging?" Belial rasped, his face melting under the inferno. It was a killing blow, one that would have felled any ordinary warrior, yet Ethan stood unmoving, calmly taking the full brunt of the attack. Belial stared in disbelief. Ethan's voice was soft but unwavering. "Consider this my salute to a true fighter, one who gives everything in battle." In that instant, Belial felt a surge of respect. He recognized in Ethan the same fierce honor he'd sought in battle, something Dante, descended from the proud Spartans, had never displayed. Despite his impending defeat, Belial's spirit burned bright. "Even if I perish here," he managed, his strength fading, "I am honored to have fought you." With those final words, Belial's soul coalesced into pure magical energy and transformed into an artifact beyond any known legend. Ethan reached out, and the light solidified in his hand, a magnificent double-barreled gun, its oversized muzzles and barrel etched with living flame. He cradled the weapon, awestruck. Lord of Hell, Belial. The newly forged cannon throbbed with infernal power. In that moment, Ethan knew he had claimed a relic of unimaginable might. The cannon's magic was deceptively simple. Channel enough mana into its barrel, and it fired explosive rounds that detonated on impact. Pour in even more power, and it spewed hellfire so scorching it could incinerate anything in its path. In ace combat, Ethan observed with a crooked grin, you can use a cannon's recoil to lift off the ground. I wonder if I could pull that off too. Ethan was thoroughly pleased. If Belial had manifested as a blade or dagger, he'd have stood little chance against Nero, but this brutal artillery form suited him perfectly. Just then, the entire island plunged into chaos. Dante had broken in. Ever since Pope Sentus's resurrection, his foremost goal had been to capture Dante, and now, by some twist of fate, Dante had stormed the gates himself. But as soon as the trap was sprung, they realized how fatally underestimated the task was. Dante's strength was otherworldly. Without even breaking a sweat, he cut down countless demons who dared face him. He brushed off the Demon Sword Order's pursuit just as callously, slaughtering every initiate who'd undergone the ritual of death. Witnessing the carnage firsthand, Credo immediately rallied his squad to arrest Dante on the spot, a desperate measure they decided to keep from Nero. In that moment, as fire and brimstone ripped through the fortress walls, Ethan felt a thrill of anticipation. The real battle was only just beginning. Ethan had convinced himself that his clash with Dante was nothing more than a misunderstanding. Only Credo knew the bitter truth, but he'd said nothing, letting Ethan cling to his illusions. Now, Credo's absence no longer troubled him, for Ethan had unearthed something far more disturbing. Hordes of demons scattered across the island, just as his father had warned. Somebody here was summoning these fiends and experimenting on them. Deep beneath the cult's mountaintop stronghold lay a barred-off sector that lower-ranked members like Ethan were forbidden even to approach. He had long found it absurd that such a vast wing existed only to be locked away. What purpose could it serve, if not to hide something shameful? Rumors circulated among the faithful, preachers who professed celibacy but led debauched private lives, tithe money funneled into clandestine schemes. But these whispered scandals now paled in comparison to the horrors Ethan had witnessed. This was no mere corruption. Whatever dark force pulsed through these hidden chambers, it threatened far more than the cult's reputation, and Ethan was determined to uncover it. Ethan's blood ran cold as he followed the dimly lit corridor, his footsteps echoing off stone walls. Every so often, he passed a chamber whose sliding doors revealed rows of iron cages, each one numbered, each one holding a grotesque form. In some cells, the prisoners looked almost human. In others, their flesh had twisted into bestial shapes. Half their bodies were man, half demon, as if some sadistic hand had split them down the middle. They aren't demons. What are they? Ethan remembered Credo's words. Those chosen by God would be reborn as angels. But if you weren't chosen, if you were left behind, what became of you? The answer lay in these cages. He halted at each barred window, staring into hollow eyes. The captives didn't plead or groan. Many didn't even glance his way. Had they lost the power of speech, or simply given up any hope of rescue? The silence pressed in around him like suffocating fog, and Ethan's heart pounded with mounting dread. He quickened his pace toward the far end of the hall, the exit he hoped would lead him out of this nightmare. But a number on one cage made him stop cold. As he peered inside, he recognized the half-beast slumped on the straw. "Tonio?" Ethan whispered, voice catching. The creature's human eye, wild with terror, darted away, and it recoiled against the back wall. Ethan's throat went dry. Tonio was trapped here, a living experiment mutilated by forces neither of them fully understood. And if Tonio had been condemned, then what hope remained for anyone else? Determination flared in Ethan's chest. There had to be a way to free them all, even if it meant defying whatever cruel design had brought them to this place. He forced himself to swallow his fear, pressed his hand against the cold bars, and vowed, "I'll get you out of here." Ethan watched in stunned silence as the man who once clicked his tongue at every misstep now cowered in terror, trembling like a wounded creature. Before him stretched a series of numbered iron cages, each one holding a distorted form that no longer looked human. Ethan's heart pounded as he focused on the figure in cage number 3. That can't be Sagan. Just a month ago, Tonio and Sagan had been ordinary men, friends, even, though they'd never seen eye to eye with Ethan. After the incident, they'd thrown themselves into relentless training. Ethan had run into them several times since then, always ready to strike with his right hand if they showed hostility. Yet every encounter left him baffled. Their bodies and their aura remained unchanged. Now this. "What in God's name happened to you?" he hissed. Fueled by a mix of anger and grief, Ethan slammed his fist against the cage. Metal rattled. Inside, Tonio shrieked, a sound half-human, half-beast, backing away on all fours. The sight struck Ethan with a fresh wave of sorrow. This was no longer the Tonio he'd sparred alongside so many times. He stepped back, chest heaving. There was nothing he could do from outside these bars. He had no idea what dark forces had twisted his former comrades into these abominations. Had Tonio, hungry for more power, bargained with some secret patron? Was he seduced by Agnes's honeyed promises? Or had some foul enchantment robbed them of their humanity without their knowing? Whatever the truth, Ethan's fury turned toward the Order. He'd never liked Tonio or Sagan, and they'd felt the same disdain for him. But seeing them reduced to these creatures ignited a fierce indignation in his chest. Their mutual dislike meant nothing now. Beneath the cage's cold iron, two friends, however flawed, were crying out for salvation, and Ethan would not turn away. Nero never follows the rules. He lives for chaos. Having grown up alongside Credo, he's learned that he rarely faces serious consequences for his antics. It's no surprise, then, that Tonio and Sagan can't stand him, especially since Nero and Ji-Lai are so close. Their bond is obvious to anyone who watches them, Nero included, and because Ji-Lai's parents dote on him, treating him almost like another child in the family, he's become even more entwined with her life. Add to that his knack for charging ahead without thinking, and you've got a constant source of worry for Ji-Lai, who frets over him at every turn. Nero chuckled at the thought. "No, that's not it. Not at all." He muttered the words so softly, Tonio had to lean in to catch them. Tonio's eyes flickered with curiosity, but he stayed silent. "Being like family," Nero went on, "sounds like a worn-out excuse. Don't get me wrong, Ji-Lai's parents have been nothing but kind to me, but even if they hadn't, I'd still care about her, just as much as I care about you." Chapter 861, Rebellious Teenager. Ethan stood before the barred chamber, his heart pounding. He had to save Gilly, no question about it. She meant more to him than anyone else in the world. Not simply because her parents had once taken him in, but because, over time, he had come to love her. He loved her as a woman, pure and radiant. He'd never dared speak his feelings aloud, unsure whether she would be horrified at the thought. Yet he knew he couldn't hesitate any longer. Memories of fallen comrades flashed through his mind, their tragic ends stealing his resolve. He whispered into the gloom, "Don't worry, Jilly. I will save you, and I'll make those responsible pay for what they've done." A faint, approving smile curved on the ghostly visage of Tonio, his former ally. Tonio had always fought to protect Gilly, sought power for her sake. Ethan had only been lucky enough to follow in his footsteps. "Watch over me," Ethan murmured, "and give me strength." He forced a calm expression onto his face, then turned away from the cage. There was no way to break the barrier holding her, or to restore the others trapped inside. That frustration gnawed at him, but he refused to let it stop him now. He owed Gilly his everything. With renewed determination, Ethan strode to the spiral staircase leading down. Each step carried him closer to the heart of this prison, and one step closer to rescuing the woman he loved. The Savior is more than a mere war machine. It's the cult's crowning achievement, a titanic weapon meant to usher in their vision of a blissful world. Its basic operating principle, sealing magical energy inside an artificial shell and channeling it for combat, is the same as that of the White Angel. But where the White Angel is a mass-produced automaton built around a single demon's shell and soul, the Savior is a one-of-a-kind marvel of magical engineering. Agnes achieved this uniqueness by grafting a variety of demon cells into the Savior's shell. The result is a hull of incredible strength, elasticity, and regenerative power, with magic conduction speeds that far outstrip the White Angel's. Beneath that shell lies the demon heart furnace, an internal combustion engine powered by the essence of millions of sacrificed demons. Like a human heart, it continuously pumps raw magical energy through the Savior's vast frame, fueling every movement. Despite its enormous size, the Savior moves with surprising agility. Its reinforced shell and onboard furnace combine to make it the most fearsome weapon ever devised, an unstoppable juggernaut capable of crushing any opponent in its path. Ethan's crowning achievement, the construct known simply as the Savior, stood before him in the dim light of the workshop. Years of research and countless sleepless nights had gone into its creation. By any measure, it was his greatest masterpiece. Yet Ethan knew it was far from perfect. No matter how much mana he poured into the Heartfire engine at its core, the energy still leaked away before it could be fully harnessed. In its current state, the Savior could hold its own against ordinary demons, but in theory, it should have been capable of so much more. Its colossal frame demanded an almost limitless supply of magic. Millions of lesser fiends were barely a drop in the bucket, compared to the power it needed to unleash its true potential. Frustrated by these limitations, Ethan had almost given up on perfecting the design. Then Gloria appeared at the gates of the cult's fortress, carrying a treasure he had only dared to dream of, the legendary sword Sparta. This was the blade once wielded by the famed magic swordsman Sparta, the hero who had vanquished the devil itself, and it brimmed with raw arcane energy. Legend held that if the savior could draw upon the sword's power, it would gain an extra 12 points of raw mana, enough, Ethan believed, to bring the Colossus to life at last. But there was a catch. The sword's magic was nearly too great to be tamed by anyone but its original master. Without Sparta himself to guide that tremendous power, the blade risked overwhelming the construct, or worse, turning against its creator. And so Ethan faced a new challenge: how to unlock Sparta's magic without the swordsman at his side. The cult's savior had been engineered to replace the missing magic swordsman Sparta. Yet to finish their creation, they first needed the real Sparta. A clear case of putting the cart before the horse. When Pope Sankodos read Agnos's report, he didn't hesitate. "Then what about Sparta's son, Ethan?" he asked. There was no doubt Ethan existed. Long ago, he had sealed away a demon king bent on resurrection, and ever since he'd roamed the land hunting demons. The cult kept him under close surveillance. At first, some high-ranking members even proposed abducting him to Fortuna and worshipping him as a living god. But after months of covert observation, that idea quietly died. Ethan was simply too human. He ran a modest office in a rundown town, blasted rock music, and sipped red wine over pizza in broad daylight. He fought not only with a blade but with pistols as well, hardly the disciplined image the cult promoted. And yet, despite his casual demeanor, he was Sparta Dante's son and carried his father's bloodline. That alone convinced Pope Sankodos that Ethan could pick up his father's mantle and finally bring the cult's savior to life. Ethan's theft of the Yama sword and Agnes's decision to follow him have thrown the cult of the author into panic. Yet none suspect that young Nero secretly carries the blood of Sparta's line. From the moment Dante first appeared on their horizon, the cult has reshaped its entire design around one single goal: seize Dante as the vessel of the savior. Only he, they believe, could ever channel Sparta's hidden magic to its fullest, letting the sword's true power flow. Now, at last, the scheme stands on its final brink. Dante has arrived in Fortuna, an opportunity the cult cannot ignore, no matter how unlikely success seems. Pope Sintes dispatches his greatest general, Credo, to capture Dante and bring him back for the ritual. But Dante's strength has grown far beyond even that of the demon emperor Mendes. When Credo's squad confronts him, they are routed in moments. Humiliated and defeated, Credo limps back to the Holy City. Pope Santes is incensed, not so much by Nero's secret lineage or his childish meddling, but by the thought of losing Credo, his most trusted commander. There is only one answer: bind Nero under Credo's watch, keep him from wandering into forbidden knowledge or rash adventures. With no choice but to obey, Credo accepts the order, and the gears of the cult's final gambit begin to turn. Ethan stood frozen, caught between two sides and mortified by the whole mess. Still, he'd done what he came to do: warn Nero. Now the fallout was clear. Nero had stormed off from Credo in anger, collapsing their partnership in the process. Ethan had explained the horror he'd witnessed, but Credo had flatly ordered him to drop the investigation. "Walter, don't be ridiculous," he'd snapped. Frustrated and alone, Nero had fled onto the empty street, confused and raw. Nero. He barely heard his name before Ethan's familiar figure emerged from the shadows. "Ethan." Nero's voice cracked, and in that moment, he felt more relief than he had in days. The city around them seemed to stretch on endlessly, but at least he wasn't utterly alone. He'd had nowhere else to turn. Going back to Geli hadn't felt right, and now, unmoored by his fight with Credo, he didn't even know what to do next. "Where have you been?" Nero demanded. Ethan ran a hand through his hair. "I went to the Order's headquarters." Nero blinked. "And? Did you find anything?" Ethan's eyes turned grim. "I saw dozens of people, friends, neighbors, twisting into demons before my eyes." Nero's heart pounded. What are we going to do? He needed answers. He needed a plan. And more than anything, he needed Ethan's help.